Well, I got to advertise for C-Ray, so if you don't mind.
I can run back home. Our product placement.
90% of my research is made possible by Mountain Dew.
You don't have one bottle of Mountain Dew?
No, that's okay. Welcome back, and greetings from sunny Roswell, New Mexico. If you are viewing this video and have really no idea what you're looking at, this is the conclusion of the Ancient of Days UFOs and Abduction Conference. It was held here in July 2nd through 5th, 2004, where we had what I consider some of the nation's top UFO and abduction researchers, as well as some of the nation's best theologians who have examined this material. And nobody at this table is a debunker of UFOs or abductions. We believe it's very real, and we're getting some of the best minds and theologians and available research together. We've more or less heard everybody out. Everybody's spoken from a wide variety of belief systems. The only rule to be a presenter here was it doesn't matter what your worldview or your spiritual view is that your presentation had to be based on research, not on dogma. So with that said, we've gone over probably close to 20 presentations in this weekend. And what the format is, we've got questions written on index cards from people that have been here all weekend. And in addition to that, Boyd's got a couple natural questions that we think will work very well. We won't take time introducing each person right now. You can go to ancientofdays.net, click on 2004's information. There's complete biographies, backgrounds, and the topics that they presented here this weekend. But my name's Guy Malone. We appreciate you watching by video and look forward to having a very good panel today. And the other thing I said in the opening remarks is, like I said, a wide variety of belief systems and backgrounds here, opposing views for sure, but nobody's job here is to convince or to convert anybody. We've sat down as friends, we're going to get up as friends. That's hopefully, but that is the plan. And there's, like I said, nobody's supposed to convince or convert anybody. Boyd Barrett's our moderator. His job will be to keep this from digressing more than anything into debates over religion or debates over worldviews. We're going to be very specific to the topics we've covered already. With that said, Boyd, you get us rolling. Appreciate you.
Okay, well, I have to tell you that I have really only one basic, there's only one basic reason that Guy asked me to do this, and that is I know just enough about the topic to understand the terminology, but not enough about it to insert my opinion very often. So I'm just going to try to stay out of it as much as I can, but hand this thing around. We have had a few questions put in the question box, and we're going to start with those for some specific people. Actually, this first one is for either Mike Heiser or Guy Malone, or it says anyone else, so anybody else that really wants to chime in on this. Are the extra-biblical post-Christ Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels, well respected by historians and theologians, or not, and why? Mike?
Go for it, Mike.
It would depend on what you mean by well respected. They're not viewed as fabrications, certainly. They're not viewed as material that's contrived. So in that respect, sure, they're well respected. The content is often dramatically different than the canonical Gospels, and so there's going to be, some controversy there. I wish we had the question here so I would know where we were going with that question, or if that was sufficient.
Is the questioner here?
The Gnostic Gospels it's really a reference to literature that has the look and feel of a gospel, story of the life and teachings of Christ, and specifically in this case from Nag Hammadi in Egypt. These were discovered roughly around the same time as the Dead Sea Scrolls, late 40s, 50s, that kind of thing. And their contents are, as the category would suggest, they're Gnostic. They have a completely different view of Christ in many respects. The role of women, specifically Mary Magdalene, is elevated in the Gnostic Gospels. Probably the most famous, the Gospel of Thomas, really isn't a gospel. It's just a collection of sayings. In other words, it doesn't have like a chronological story of Jesus' life. It's just a collection of sayings. If you've ever looked at the book of Proverbs, it's kind of what the Gospel of Thomas looks like. Jesus said this, and he said this, and he said this. It doesn't have, and he went here, and he did that, and he went here, and he did thus and so. So it doesn't have the flavor, really the genre format of a true gospel. But that's sort of a minor point. There's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. There's the Gospel of Peter. There are accounts, other accounts besides the canonical material. And by canonical, I mean the material that was accepted as inspired or from an apostolic hand is probably a better way to put it, or a close associate of an apostle. Granted, the early church was dealing all the time with literature that bore the name of an apostle or an associate of an apostle. And there were certain procedures that are very non-supernatural, very, very normal, very sort of deliberative and bureaucratic as to how they decided what should be in the canonical collection or not. In terms of theology, if you're just wondering, I find a lot of students are disturbed by the whole matter of canonicity because it seems so human. It seems so arbitrary. It really depends on what your view of providence is. If you really believe in providence, then God didn't take a day off or a week off or a month off when these decisions were being made. In other words, he was in the process. And that has always been the way that theologians have looked at the matter of canonicity, that you can't make any theological decisions about the validity or invalidity of canonicity in the canonical process without a view of providence. If you want to take God out of it, then it's completely arbitrary. If you want to keep God in it, then we have to accept that God supervised the process, was able to influence people to make the right choices, which goes back to, if you're a theist, that's nice, but if you are a theist, you really need to believe that God can actually do something. Otherwise, what's the point? So in terms of respect, though, in the scholarly community, they're not viewed as fabrications in any way. I mean, they're viewed as genuine documents from the time period, 2nd century or so.
I'd like to comment on them because I've read all.
I knew you would.
I've read every one of the Nag Hammadi collections one time thoroughly all the way through. Originally there were over 70 of them found in Nag Hammadi, 1945, by a young man named Muhammad Ali. He stumbled upon them. It's actually historically important to understand that after Christ was crucified, the Roman Empire, together with the Jews, those Jews who were against Christ at that time, they were burning everything. They wanted to erase him from history, the entire man. They were torturing Christians, burning them alive, feeding them to lions. They wanted to set an example that you could not be a Christian in that era. There's many famous accounts, including the great story of what is her name? I can't remember her name right now. I don't want to say it, but having read all of them, none of them diminish Christ as the Messiah. In fact, they glorify him even greater. It was said in the Gospels that Jesus said that he who has seen me truly has seen the Father also. In the Nag Hammadi collection, you have a gospel called the Apocryphon of John, where John is being ridiculed by the Jews. He goes out into the desert. He's told he was deceived by them. And in a blaze of light, Jesus comes in this incredible thunderous light down onto the ground in the middle of the desert to greet John. And in it, he physically transfigures from the old man whose beard was mature, like you had pointed out, as the Ancient of Days. Then he transfigures into a young man whose beard was just beginning as Jesus walked on the earth. And then miraculously, he transfigures into a woman. And he says to John with a sense of humor, John, why do you doubt, or why are you afraid? That is, do not be timid. I am the one who's with you always. I am the Father, I am the Mother, and I am the Son. So there's all throughout the Nag Hammadi collection, you'll see this feminine aspect of God, a very balanced God, appearing in both the feminine energies known as the Sophia of Christ, and really none of it does not glorify him. None of it diminishes him. He still holds the same absolute divine position. So I don't really see, after having read every single one of them, what the problem with them is with the church today. They were translated by Princeton University. Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton, is one of the major translators at Claremont in California. All major university scholars have translated these, so they take them very seriously, but the church's official position, especially the Catholic Church, is that it's heresy. We have to know that it wasn't until the First Council of Nicaea, wasn't until, I believe, the 3rd century AD, that's 300 to 400 years after the crucifixion of Christ, when they formed this council to decide the canonical Gospels, the 4 Gospels we have today. That's a long time to have passed. In that time, it wasn't just the Nag Hammadi library we lost. We lost things like the Acts of John, which is a gospel that Pope Leo the Great ordered to be burned and never practiced. An incredible account of the crucifixion scene. There's a lot of them that our university scholars have looked at. To decide 300 years later, and again, if you believe in providence and you believe God was present, you could maybe agree on the sequestering of the 4 Gospels, but when you really get your head in there and you read them, they all glorify him. There's nothing in them that is negative, so I don't see anything wrong with them.
I'd like to respond to that. On the one hand, I mean, there's an element of truth to what David's saying. The Gnostic Gospels certainly have a high view of Christ. That's certainly true. And the Apocryphon of John, referencing Jesus as the Father, is important, because that is essentially the Orthodox traditional position. In that, we don't want to say, the Orthodox position would not say that the Son is the Father and the Father is the Son, but they would say they're of equal essence. But in the Gnostic terminology, that, you know, the Apocryphon of John, it sounds, in my mind, very close to an affirmation of orthodoxy. The problem is that the material of Gnosticism isn't always the same. The Gnosticism was just like Christianity, of the Orthodox variety. In other words, there were sects, there were different opinions, there were different statements. It wasn't a monolithic, cohesive, agreed upon theology that's always consistent. I mean, even within the books of the New Testament, there are passages that are difficult to reconcile, and the same would be true in Gnostic literature. I think, despite the fact that Jesus has a very high position in Gnostic Gospels, if you do any reading in Gnosticism, you will find that one of the major issues is, was Jesus viewed as an uncreated being? Not necessarily that he was later placed on the level of equality with the Father, but there was a concern that Gnosticism, among other issues, but that Gnosticism sort of took away Christ's status as a pre-existent being of one essence with the Father. And it worked its way out in the Arian debates, which are directly connected with the Council of Nicaea. It is not true, and I will insist upon this. The idea that we had to wait till Nicaea till we had a canon is just not true. The major scholar on this is, if you want to read this, is Roger Beckwith. He's probably the leading scholar on canonicity in the world. And he's produced a number of good works on canonicity, going back to statements of the Church Fathers, and not just the Church Fathers, but in letters that they wrote, and not official church statements, but just correspondences, accounts of their lives, where they will refer to canonical books that we have now in ways that cite them as authoritative. They're very formulaic expressions. Thus says the Lord, thus says the Scriptures, as it is written. It's certainly true, and if you've done any reading here, those of you in the audience, that there was a disagreement, even in the traditional church, as to the number of the books in the canon. For instance, the Catholic Church wants to accept some of the books that the Protestant Church would now call the Apocrypha. So there were disagreements. But those disagreements and those debates were conducted long before Nicaea. In fact, by the time of Polycarp, we have, which is the second century in the 100s, which is considerably before Nicaea, you have lists and statements referring to what should be considered the authoritative books of the New Testament. So to say that there was no notion of what the New Testament canon was, and I realize David didn't make it that broad, just does not stand up under scrutiny. But I don't know if it really doesn't relate specifically to the whole issue of Gnosticism. The controversy between Gnosticism and Orthodox Christianity is a lot deeper than that. Not just which books get in and that kind of thing. Even the view of women in Gnosticism. There was a recent article that I read shortly before coming here on, I think it was in the collection, there's a book called Feminine Views of Gnosticism. I can't remember who the editor is, but one of the chapters in that book was detailing how certain Gnostic texts had a negative, low view of women. So even that wasn't consistent. And a lot of researchers in alternative history and ancient mysteries and that kind of thing, like Bagent and Lee and Lincoln, seem to portray the New Testament as having this negative view of women, where the Gnostic view was just this wonderfully elevated, enlightened view. It's just not true. That there was difference of opinion within the Gnostic communities, plural, on that issue. But I think we're getting a little far afield with that.
Okay. You'd like to say one?
Regarding the Nag Hammadi documents, I co-wrote a book with a psychic called Armand Marcotte, who did wonderful psychic detective work with detectives in California and in the Midwest. And he had an interest in reincarnation, and at that time I did not. And so I consulted a Catholic theologian whom I trusted, Monsignor Joseph Pollard. He told me that there was nothing in the Catholic religion which spoke against a belief in reincarnation. There was nothing which said that it existed, but nothing which said it did not exist, and that I was free as a sincere researcher to search out the truth for myself. So we wrote this book called The Psychic and the Detective, Armand Marcotte and myself, and we started each chapter with a little sentence or two from the Nag Hammadi manuscripts reflecting the belief in reincarnation which was held at that time the documents were written.
All right, let's go to this next one now. Yes. Oh, you would like, okay. You want one?
Yeah, it was addressed, Mike and Guy. What opened the can of worms for this? This is a topic I would actually say is not even appropriate for the panel. Like I said the other day, it's great for Denny's till 4 in the morning. But I opened the can of worms with the talk on the case for Enoch, in which Mike and David both quoted from and affirmed. So I can see why the question would be brought up, is because we already affirmed a book that's not in the Bible as at least authoritative or true, whether you want to believe it's inspired. And I would turn around and say there's many other Jasher and Jubilees that fall into that realm. But I think the question was, how do theologians or academics view them? And if I am one, the way I've always looked at extra biblical books, whether it's Enoch or anything that's been discussed here, is you compare it to what is in the Scripture already, at least what we know or has been accepted, if you're looking from an Orthodox view, period. And if it contradicts, obviously or blatantly, then you probably know that there's a reason it wasn't canonized. The example I've always used in talking about this is, and I hope I'm right, but it was the Gospel of Thomas that has an account, it might be Mary, one of you guys can correct me later, but before we move on, is that there's an account where Jesus made either birds from clay when he was like 5 or 12 years old, and then he gave them life. Is that Thomas? Yes. Okay, well, the Orthodox view of the Gospels is that Jesus had no supernatural miracle-working power until his baptism by the Holy Spirit when he was 33 years old. So when I read that in the Gospel of Thomas, my red light goes off, red flag. I'm like, this probably isn't true. It's probably not inspired. And therefore I wouldn't receive it as doctrine, which brings us into the whole which we shouldn't do today, really. The inerrancy of Scripture question is, like the Bible's not a book of science. We've talked a lot about the contradictions that appear in the Bible. The Bible's not primarily a book of history either. What the Bible says is that it's profitable for doctrine. So even if you could prove to me, and like Mike said, nothing in the Bible, no historical fact has been disproven. If you could disprove that the entire Bible is just one big parable that God made up, like Jesus did every day, it's profitable for doctrine. And if you're an Orthodox Christian, it's your rule for faith and practice. And anything that contradicts the doctrine that's in the Bible, I wouldn't say throw it out. You may find a lot of historical value in it, but you should be very highly suspect of it. It needs to be written down and submitted to Boyd on the index card.
All right. This one actually has Mike, Guy, and Jim. Jim, I'm going to let you start on this one. Jim, so you'll be listening. This is a three-part question. Number one, was there another civilization on Earth before Adam and Eve? 2, was there another planet in our solar system? And 3, could heaven be an actual planet?
You can take any or all.
Yeah.
An hour for each.
Limit.
Start that first one. Give me A first.
Was there another civilization on Earth before Adam and Eve?
I personally don't believe so, and I know I'm not in consistency with everybody else on that. The second one, could heaven be another planet?
Well, was there another planet in our solar system?
I think that's rather obvious. The asteroid belt. And when they've done some surface features on the entire solar system, it's almost as if there was a blast that just blasted everything at one time. I think that's pretty conclusive, just on the evidence alone. I don't know that there's any scripture. I think Dave could probably answer that. He might know if there's any scripture that does allude to that kind of thing. And if I recall, you might have had something in your book about that, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then could heaven be another planet?
Well, you know, most of you have heard that I have this belief that the Bible clearly says that God lives outside of time and everything's all done and finished. And so our linear experience then would be a parallel altered universe. So it's not too scary for me to think that heaven could actually maybe be this duplicity of what's here, only to the total perfection that God originally intended. Just a theory, not doctrine.
Dave?
Well, was there a civilization before Adam and Eve? It's interesting, if you read some works in the Talmud, they talk about the world of Tohu, this idea that there was a destroyed civilization, and they don't even actually look at, as the Jewish sages, they don't actually look at it as a human realm. They talk about it as an angelic realm that was shattered. And that fits right into this idea of how God shattered a thing called Rahab, which is in, you find it in Psalms, you find it in Isaiah, you find it in Job. It talks about how by his wisdom, by his understanding, he shatters Rahab. It's within the context of talking about celestial mechanics. It talks about the pillars of heaven are stunned at his rebuke. It talks about, you know, a cosmic sort of chaotic episode. And then the name Rahab is always attached to this object that's shattered. And the actual Hebrew for it is it's pulverized. It's titrated. It's made into powder, practically. And you look at Rahab, and you think, oh, maybe we're talking about the harlot in Jericho. But it's not spelled the same. Harlot in Jericho is actually Rechab, and it means field, open space. Rahab is more boastfulness, pride, all those things that you would attach to Satan. And you read in his I will speech, Isaiah 14. So there's a continuity there, and there's actually a lot that you can find in the Old Testament and in the Talmud and some of the pseudepigraphic works that the Jews have done that talk about this concept of something having existed, not necessarily on the earth, but as civilizations go and as intelligent sort of edifices go somewhere in the solar system. And getting back to the topic which we shall not go back into too quickly. I was thinking it's really important to name and explain some of the terms that are used. Gnosticism thrown out all the time. Gnostic and gnosis means knowledge. Sophia, which you refer to as another name for Mary in the Gnostic Gospels, it just means wisdom in Greek. And we're all going back then to Genesis 3 and that conflict that I was trying to talk about of gnosis, the tree of knowledge, brought out to man. There's some good to it, because it's called the knowledge of good and evil. There's some good to it. There's some very good to it. But it's not the knowledge of eternity. It's not the knowledge of how to become immortal. That's the point of contention. That's where the Gnostics go in one direction, and the gospel goes in the other direction. And I think it's kind of a contradiction in terms to say Gnostic gospel, because the gospel means good news in the Old English, like evangelikon in the Greek means good news. People throw these words out a lot without actually attaching the significance to them. The good news is, it isn't what you know, it's who you know, or rather who knows you. That's the good news. There's bad news though. You're gonna die. That's what the bad news is. The good news is, God's provided a way out. You go to Genesis 3 and you start looking at what the conflict was. That's the heart of it. Anyway, I won't try to get back into that again.
Can I get back to the one question?
Okay, that's
that
back.
comment?
Yeah.
Though I may not see a pre-Adamic human race, the angels were already existed. They had to have a beginning point somewhere. And I have no problem with angels living in the second heaven on other planets. They're sentient, intelligent beings, more intelligent than man. They must have a social order. They must have, and they do have a physicalness to them. The Bible makes that quite clear. So I have no problem with them living in the second heaven, on other planets. The word, wherever it's talking about eternal life, the word eternity there is associated with a cyclic pattern or cycles. Ecclesiastes alludes to that, with the former things never being remembered and even the things now in the future not being known. So that fits in totally. I have no problem with any of that. And that's why I like Dave's material.
Did either guy or Mike, your name was on there. Are you okay? Are you on?
I'll just say that I kind of agree with what Jim said. Angelic civilization, and yes, other planets obviously exist all over. And yeah, they may live or reside on other planets. The Bible specifies, although in a negative light, Pleiades and what's the other? Orion. And guess what people are contacted today often say they're from. But to clarify Dave's word on, would you say Gnostic Gospels? I think to clarify, David was saying that's like military intelligence or jumbo shrimp. But no, that's not my comment on the Gnostic Gospels, but because I haven't read them. I've not read the Nag Hammadi, by the way, but I just earlier explained what my rule of understanding them would be. Are you good?
I don't see any biblical evidence for a pre-Adamic human race. The angels were certainly there already. To speak of angelic civilization and living on other planets, I don't feel like I can exclude that and dismiss it. I'm not persuaded of it, though, so you can put me in the undecided category. I do agree with Dave about Rahab and Leviathan, essentially interchangeable there in terms of the destruction motif, and Leviathan being the cosmic serpent. In Canaanite literature, Leviathan was also Yam, or sea. We've talked about this before, about how the Milky Way captures all these images. And Lord Nahar, which is river. I do think, I consider it very possible, and the more I think about it, the more I lean toward it, that these episodes do not, even though you have a dragon motif, do not speak of Genesis 3, but speak of something prior to that event. And I don't believe in a gap theory, so I'm not putting it between 1:1 and 1:2. I would put it even before Genesis 1, of some cataclysmic cosmic event. there are just some things that I won't get into now that impress me as possible trajectories that somebody in my field can look at. And I think that when I finally do that and put some concentrated effort into it, I think I'm going to come out pretty close to where Dave's at in that respect. And one last comment on the Gnostic issue, as Dave brought up the question of salvation. That's probably the pre-existence of Christ, and maybe even more fundamentally a difference between the canonical Gospels and the Gnostic Gospels is the way of salvation. In Gnosticism, you don't need a substitutionary bloody atonement by Christ. The way of the path of salvation is knowledge, and the church did object to that. But again, there were gradations of that discussion within the Gnostic communities, again, plural. So just as I don't want to pigeonhole people in the early church, I don't want to pigeonhole people within Gnostic communities either. It's not a monolithic thing.
All right, now here's the follow-up question that concerning the Gnostic, but bringing it up to date. What about present day, and this is for the whole panel, anybody that wants to answer, what about present day inspired writings, inspired in quotes, such as Conversations with God, Christ Speaketh? Do you study and consider them at all? Who would like to tackle that one?
Well, I think present-day studies or present-day books and that, there's a lot of them out there, and I've read a lot of them. And a lot of them contradict what the Gospels have to say, and so I think that we just have to reject them. I really do. I think that a lot of them have an agenda that is clearly New Age, and a lot of them will redefine who Jesus is. And so I think we need to be extremely careful, as I pointed out in my talks, that one of the big things about the end times is massive deception. So I think we have to be careful about being deceived by all kinds of brand new revelations. Remember, the book of Hebrews says that Jesus Christ is the final revelation. So I consider the canon closed.
Who else?
Pass it down the line. David?
Who wants?
If we go back, I mean, to the idea that, I mean, this is fundamental Christianity, that Jesus cannot appear until the second coming. We have to remember that he appeared to the disciples, and that's one of the things about the Nag Hammadi library. A lot of it are testaments of him appearing to the disciples after the crucifixion. So if we deny the resurrection, I don't want to say that. If we deny that he can appear after the resurrection, we're denying his resurrection itself, because when he resurrected, he was free of the flesh. He could appear wherever he wanted. There are accounts like Joseph Smith in America, Native Indians like Wavokova. Many Native Indian cultures have seen him, including some believe he appeared in Mexico as Quetzalcoatl. So we can't say that he's not allowed to appear consistently throughout history. We are putting him in a box to state that you cannot appear until the second coming, and all appearances of him are false. He appeared to Saint Teresa of Avila, who was a great Catholic saint. He appeared to Saint Francis of Assisi. He has appeared throughout history to different visionaries. There are criteria, however, in the church and churches for evaluating apparitions. I don't believe that we can just say that apparitions that appear to modern visionaries are false. I think each case has to be studied, and there are numbers of them, of people who have seen him. In fact, a lot of people, I read this was quite amazing, but in Israel very recently, there was an account of, this was broadcast on Israel radio, that in Saudi Arabia, there were hundreds of people who called in who had the same exact dream of Jesus Christ to the T. Every event that happened in that dream happened to hundreds of them. They all called in during the show saying they had the dream that night. So what are we going to say about things like that? Also, you have the apparitions of Mary in Cairo, in Zaytun, that were photographed, reported by the New York Times, and published all throughout the Middle East, actual visual apparitions, and there were thousands of documented healings. Those apparitions were reported by the BBC starting again in the year 2000 in Asyut. ABC News and a lot of the CNN and a lot of news had this story on their website of these full-blown luminous apparitions with orbs of light appearing in the sky around her. So there's a lot going on with apparitions, including Medjugorje. It goes on and on and on. So I really think we can't just say, well, if it doesn't fit our criteria of how we're putting God in a box, basically, is my thought.
Okay, who else? Right here.
I just had one thing to say about the extra biblical text. The text that's coming after the Bible has already been written. It's stated in the beginning and the end of the Bible, in the book of Genesis and in the book of Revelation, not to add or subtract from the books, because the plagues of Pharaoh will be brought upon that person. So we may not see these people having plagues of Pharaoh, but God is very specific about his word not to add or subtract from it.
As a Christian, I have to believe that I have a standard that was given to go by. If this is God's word, if this is the inerrant God's word, I have to believe that this is our standard. That standard cannot be broken. If anybody comes, if a Christ comes in a visitation, the standard we have to go by is the judge. That's not our judge, that's God's judgment, okay? That's what was given to us to base anything on that was to come else. Because he warned about it, like Bill said, this would happen in the end. This is the standard that was given to us to judge truth, okay? If we're not going to stand by that standard, and we're going to accept any different message that comes along, anything that changes just a little bit, then we're supposed to trust a God that maybe lied a little bit to us. If that's the instance, I'm out of here, because I don't want to believe in a God that lies. There's a lot of them out there.
All right, now, yes.
Pure and simple, we're warned about the spirit of Antichrist. And that is easily defined in the New Testament as anything that alters the nature and character or the function of Jesus Christ as the Lamb of God, as a Savior and sacrifice, and God come in the flesh. I knew of a documentary. It was about some healing from Saint Germain, and you know the kid was verified healed, and it was a miracle. And it was great, and it was all warm and fuzzy and everything. But you know who got the glory in the end? Saint Germain. Christ was completely overlooked. In a lot of these apparitions and appearances, Joseph Smith, who got the glory? Was it Jesus Christ, the Son of God that came in the flesh? No. It was another Jesus. It was another religion. It was another gospel. Galatians, I think it's 1:18, says, "But though we or an angel from heaven or any other minister come preaching any other gospel than that which we have preached, let him be accursed." Accursed in the Greek is pretty strong. It means let him be damned. Have nothing to do with him. We're warned in the last days that there would be many signs and miracles that would be happening to possibly deceive, if it were possible, the very elect. There would be many coming in the name of Christ saying, "I am the Messiah, I am the Christ." We're in those times and we're seeing these situations. Doesn't mean that the situations or the events aren't real. They're very, very real and done by very, very real entities. But our standard of measurement has to be the written word of God as we have it right now. When there's a deviation, we're told that if we're to remain faithful, we have to stay by the rules, by the book that we have, that we know in the 66 books of the Bible. Nothing more, nothing less.
What were the book titles?
Yeah, the titles that were mentioned in that question were Conversations with God and Christ Speaketh. Has anybody? Okay.
Yeah, I've read Conversations with God, and yeah, I believe God still speaks today. I'd probably be dead if he didn't, and I sure wouldn't be in Roswell. I agree with both these guys. I agree with what Bill said and what David said, is that Jesus, he appeared to the Apostle Paul as well. You didn't mention that. I know you know it. Yeah, he could appear any time, but the Scripture is full of tests to see if it's the real Jesus or a fake one, and the test is kind of like we said before, the existing canon. If anything is said or done that's contradictory, then I would say that's a false Christ. And from Conversations with God, as my Scripture being my standard, when I read that, I read the Celestine Prophecy too. It's the best-selling self-published book of all time. He sold over 1 million copies. I envy the guy. But everything in the book is highly contradictory to what the Bible says about spirituality and God. And before we move on, I'm just dying to know what John Greenewald thinks about the Nag Hammadi library.
No,
Did you want anything?
Okay.
Let me just say one other thing. One of the larger apologetics ministries in the United States is the Spiritual Counterfeits Project of Berkeley, and they critique all these new revelations under a whole series they did, about 5 or 6 journals in a row, called Sweet Lies. And in fact, not just these books that he talked about, Conversations with God, they critiqued a lot of other books that purport to be from Jesus. And as far as apparitions go, I've studied the text of various apparitions, including Fatima and Lourdes, and it's not really Orthodox Christianity that's being promoted. And Medjugorje, it's the same thing there. We're talking about Medjugorje appointing people to Mary instead of Christ. And so what we're having is different revelations in many cases that contradict the Bible.
I have to comment on that just quickly on his answer. I mean, we can't forget that both Catholic and also Coptic Christians, Mark brought Christianity to Egypt, believe in the divinity of the Virgin Mary. So it's okay that we disagree over this. I'm Catholic, and I love the Virgin Mary, and I love saying Hail Marys every day. And I know one of my brothers is a born-again Christian, and he hates it that I love Mary. But that's our choice. I mean, we live in a free country. There are those who don't like Catholics and don't like Coptics, but we have to respect. We can't speak in absolutes, I believe. I mean, we're divided on the issue. Christianity is massively divided. So I just believe we should, I respect fundamentalists. If that's what they want to believe, that Mary has no divinity, fine. But for me, she has absolute divinity with Christ. She bore him in his womb for 9 months.
I'm glad you brought up Fatima, because the other people who were saying where Christ had appeared, I did not mention Fatima. Fatima, of course, Mary appeared first to the 3 peasant children, but then later to the last surviving child, who was then a nun, and it was Christ who appeared to her. And this is considered part of the apparitions of Fatima, a precise part of the apparitions of Fatima, which I am active. I'm an activist, Fatima activist. We are actively seeking the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, because this is what Christ asked for in regard to the apparitions of Fatima. And also may I say that the book I said, written with Armand Marcotte, A Psychic and the Detective, which mentioned Nag Hammadi and reincarnation, I meant to say it was another book I had written with psychic Armand Marcotte, called Past Lives, Future Growth. So I wanted to correct that.
Okay, we'll do one more question that is kind of the logical or illogical extension of this, and then we'll get on to some other things. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, UFOs, maybe. What, and this is, I guess, for everybody again, what if the church has become the false doctrine and the New Age is like a New Testament for this new age of understanding? What if Christianity is the deception? Who would like to handle that?
Well,
Jim?
probably ought to come back next year, because that's what I'm going to be speaking about. There's the same but opposite being played out all throughout the course of mankind's history. My second one on man-made UFOs, I showed in some of that how the gospel, how everything that God has played out will be reversed in the same but opposite pattern. And what I believe where a lot of this is going in the future, and in my book I quote from New Age leaders, I quote from the aliens, and I quote from Mein Kampf. And all three are saying the same thing. And there's strategies there that the only way to get Christians, I think it was David Spangler that wrote this, it could be John White, I'm not sure, it's in here somewhere. Can't remember all of this information on the top of my head. One of them wrote about the importance to complete Christian prophecy in order to get Christians to be on board. And so the strategy here is to do the same but opposite before the actual events happen. So create a phony rapture, create a phony tribulation period, create a phony judgment. And so the very question that you're asking is because of the influences that you've already been receiving through all of this stuff. And you're being set up for that very thing. There may be a time where this is all coming to through the alien UFO agenda, where the tables will be reversed and it'll look like the Christians were left behind, that they took the mark, and that they're the bad guys. Then that the new completion of Christianity would be the New Age movement. And it's somewhat in the same manner as Christianity was the completion of the prophetic Judaism. Very deceptive, very confusing. Come back next year and maybe I can explain more.
This one gets a little personal, but I did say it in my talk, so that means I can repeat it here. I've been on both sides. I was not on the Christian side first. I was on the New Age side first. I gave it every bit of chance I could. I explored every avenue that I could explore. I was looking for what they call enlightenment. But until I actually, and you're not going to understand this unless you're a believer. This is a very hard question to ask because it's a personal experience that convinces. Without the personal experience, it's real hard to explain. But I'm just going to give you a testimony, which I did do in the talk. I've been on both sides, and I would not return from this side, okay? I see the authority over the other isms. There is an absolute authority. If it happens to be the wrong authority, think about this a second. If the authority that I showed you guys yesterday, the authority of Jesus Christ, above all, if it's the wrong side, we're doomed anyway. Think about that. Because if it's the wrong side, we stand no chance. Because that authority is over all the other ones anyway. Just to ponder.
All right. Now, there is one other very technical biblical question that I need to ask Mike, and then we'll move on to something else. Now, this is extremely technical, Mike, so I don't know how long it's going to take you to answer this. Is the word dunderhead Ugaritic, Akkadian, or Sumerian? Which one?
It's Ugaritic.
Ugaritic. Okay, okay. That's taken care of. Okay. Now, this is for everybody. Interesting question. How have technical, and by technical they mean digital media, manipulation, camcorders, etc., commercial, like money-making potential of UFO images and storylines, etc., communications such as internet, micro-publishing, explosion of cable TV channels, etc. How has all of that revolutionized ufology over the past 10 to 15 years? John, how about you?
I think I would tackle the internet side of it and say that, you know, you go back 50 years or however many years with the UFO incident, you deal with organizations like NICAP and even the early days of MUFON. They shared their information, as we would call it today, in a very archaic mean, and they would have to send it out through postal mail and newsletters and so on. And today I can write Steve Bassett, who lives 3,000 miles away, and he'll get it in a second. Share information, ask questions. I can do the same with Richard Dolan, who also lives about 3,000 miles away. I can show him pictures, photographs, or scans of new documents that I got that they could appear in an instant 3,000 or even 10,000 or 15,000 miles away, wherever you live. And I think that's going to revolutionize how we all share this information. But on top of that, ufology itself has excelled, I think, from just reading just in the last 10 years by the public's awareness of it. That you could put something on a website like I've done with mine. Now it's 140,000 pages in, and anybody in the entire world can go on there and download 8 years of research. Now you go back 25 years, could you do that? No, you couldn't. You would have to see those newsletters. You would have to spend a few $100s to go and travel and see these conferences. So I think in that respect, the internet is going to revolutionize even in the future, especially when you get into streaming video, which I'm going to be doing and have done. You can download a couple-minute clip, which was kind of a teaser to the Black Vault television series that we're currently working on. And you're going to see more of those. And as you see more of those, you're going to realize that this isn't edited by a CNN editor or somebody from the media, which again, going back X amount of years, that's all you deal with, is stuff that the editor wants you to see and doesn't want you to see, and that's all you'll see. With the internet, like I said, and that can be a TV channel in itself, and then you see the actual research. And I think that will continue to revolutionize the entire community.
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead. Hi, this is Rich Nolan. Technology has exploded the field of UFO research since the late 1980s. Television was a big part of it. Prior, as John pointed out, prior to the late 1980s, UFO research was dominated by a couple of organizations. And there were fewer, let us say, kind of loners who would go out there and make their contribution. That has totally changed today, and it's actually true. On the other hand, so you have a more of a diffusion of information, primarily through the internet, but you also get the other side of it, which is centralization of information. I look at media now as what I call an 80-20 rule, and by that I simply mean 80% of the people get one kind of media, about 20% get the other kind of media. So that if you're in the 80%, you get the New York Post, you get the Jerry Springer show. You can believe whatever you want to believe if you're in the 80%, because it doesn't really matter. If you're in the 20%, that is the management class of the society, what you are permitted to believe is actually much more narrow and restricted. That is Peter Jennings culture, McNeil era, New York Times. And it's a fact that you have, I believe the number is 5 corporations owning approximately 90% of all media that most people will encounter in their waking lives. So for all of the liberty we have of the internet, most of that liberty is basically people going to msnbc.com, in which their information they're getting is not radically different than what they'd be getting from television, except maybe in a little bit of quantity. So there are many opportunities, however, that technology offers us for the future. The fact that you've got camcorders out there in all parts of the world allows people to video these things, except up till now it hasn't really made a huge dent in changing the structure of power. That is not to say it will not in the future. And I believe that with effort by people who care, combined with a wider diffusion of ownership of high technology means of detecting unidentified and anomalous phenomena, that at some point this dam can break. Thanks.
Okay. So you can give a political, I mean, it's made it possible for you to call UFOs a political statement too.
Political what? I'm sorry?
Get political.
Let me pose you a question. Because, well, my answer to that question, or my thought, was that because of the communication media, that now it's only for the first time possible to even make UFOs and disclosure a political issue. How many people could you have reached in the last 10 years if there were no internet? And I think you should say something about that.
I can respond to that. Okay. I don't mean to be contentious. I might have to go see what that is. Should we stop that, whatever's going on there? Oh, that's a child. Okay.
I guess I do have to go see what that is.
What happened?
We have a situation.
Yeah, I think we have a situation outside. Can anybody here provide spiritual guidance? I'm going to have to disagree with Guy a little bit. The political engagement of this issue has been going on since the day it began. It's never stopped. And it used all the media that it had available to it. And as you look back in the history of it, that included the publication by many newspapers of the initial Roswell announcement, the crash saucer, the publication of the retraction by General Ramey, publication of the hearings that were held in 68, 66, article, they've never stopped. They never stopped. But yes, something did happen around 1990. It continues to this day. And what that is that we had the coming together of 3 or 4 technologies at once. We had the maturation of cable television, the placement of satellites that would transmit satellite television, the ascent of the internet to the World Wide Web. And all of this happened at once. And the effect of this, in terms of its impact, potential impact on the world, was about the equivalent of the effect of the atomic bomb. So think of this as a media atomic bomb. Now, what do I mean? When the atomic bomb was created, there were 2 strains of thought which were muddled initially, but they eventually clarified themselves pretty well. And that is, 1, since human beings, or really let's say men, had never in the history of civilization ever failed to use a weapon that they had built, that they would use these and they would destroy civilization, and that would be, it would be over. Actually, initially they thought it would just kill a lot of people, and then Carl Sagan, I think because he was allowed to do it, because of some deal he cut with the military intelligence complex, was able to come forward without any hindrance and put forward the nuclear winter scenario, which had the benefit of ending all life and thus making the concept of using these things unacceptable. So on the one side, we're going to destroy civilization. On the other side, the weapons were so powerful that we would have what we ended up having, which is mutual assured destruction, thus ending world wars. And we haven't had a world war. And so the nuclear bomb was a blessing. It was the best thing that ever happened to us. So that was the duality. And aside from a few 100,000 Japanese who unfortunately did not get under the wire there, so far, so good. Now, the media atomic bomb has had the similar effect, okay? On the one hand, this media allows the penchants and how would you say, idiosyncrasies and inclinations of the human race to be magnified to almost unlimited possibilities. Point 1, all right? We've already seen that all extreme points of view, particularly religious fanaticism, has found that the internet, in particularly, and satellite television, makes it possible to promulgate propaganda and ideology in extraordinarily fast and thorough ways. And so we're seeing terrorists come on we're seeing extremists come on internet streaming clips, make statements which are broadcast all over the world, and then cut somebody's head off. And we've seen countless other examples of this. The Ku Klux Klan developed a very fine website. And so, unchecked, I'm going to say unchecked, that may not be the word, we have to allow for the possibility that media of this power will make it possible for people of certain persuasions to in fact create circumstances which could be totally destructive. Okay, now what's the other side? The other side is that the human race, which has primarily been either tribal or feudal for most of its history, and has only recently attained what we would call a reasonably broad level of general education. Though occasionally if you hang out at a 7-Eleven and listen to some of the kids, you may question that concept. But the idea is that we're seeing a generally educated public. So for the first time in history, the public has been put in a place where they could use that education and their enhanced cerebral powers to find out the truth of the world, which generally has not been available to them, all right? Which is to say, if you were to go back to feudal Europe and have a focus group with a few hundred serfs, you would find that their overall knowledge of the state of the world, the reality of the world, was rather limited. You would find a great deal of knowledge in the high priests of the time, particularly in the church. In fact, the church was considered the bastion of knowledge. It wasn't in the business of dispensing it so much as it was in hoarding it. And even though they had some things wrong, the point is that you had, talk about the gap between the knowing and the not knowing. Most of time has been that way. So all of a sudden, we now live in an age when when everyone can be in the know, And they started that process. What we are literally saying is the human race using these tools, these extraordinarily powerful tools, to become knowledgeable, truly knowledgeable about what is going on. And so I can go on the internet and try to find out why some particular warlord in the Sudan has decided to starve out some village in the lower part of the Sudan in order to get a particular political, upper hand over some other warlord, how many kids died, whether the Red Cross came in, and on and on. You see where I'm getting at? Now, it's gotten to the point we're using advanced searching techniques and the imaging of documents that advanced religious scholars are now going through and searching ancient texts and finding the most subtlest of differences between individual words to try to literally reinterpret the Bible. And we have people hunting through millions and millions of classified documents that they get out or they find or stumble across or get through FOIAs in order to get to the truth of what the government knows about extraterrestrials, a la John Greenewald, and on and on and on. And in the middle, you have a sort of a sea of information that has various degrees of quality, and you are supposed to use your education to determine which it is. Ultimately, we'd like to remain in that middle sea, floating contentedly on top of this information that we sift through and try to understand and live our lives. But on the either end of this information atomic bomb, the world affairs will probably be determined. And right now there is a battle going on for who is going to use the internet and the satellite television and who is going to be most successful in bringing that about. It is an extraordinary thing to watch. It is extremely fun to be part of it, right? The outcome, I can assure you, is not determined yet. But I will say this. If you are someone, or if you are an organization, or if you are a nation, or if you are a church that for whatever reason takes a certain amount of pride or satisfaction in keeping extremely important and implicative information to yourself because it pleases you to do so, you have chosen the wrong time to incarnate yourself on the planet, because 4 or 5 billion people are online and they're headed your way.
I'd like to make some remarks about the internet and the UFO information. If you consider John Greenewald's Black Vault, it is extremely objective, wonderfully researched information which is invaluable. The same with Steve Bassett's disclosure information. But when you go into reports from the public about UFO sightings, you will see hundreds which have not been investigated by any investigator or researcher. And the person seeing these on the internet has no way of telling which reports are true, which are mistaken objects, and which are just plain hoaxes. And it is extremely disturbing to me that even journals like the MUFON Journal report these uninvestigated reports. You're left to decide, well, are they true or not? But in the NICAP days and in the earlier MUFON days, when we got a report in our area, we investigated it thoroughly for weeks, for months, until we could decide whether or not it was a conventional object or possibly a UFO. And then it was printed in the journal. So that is the danger of the internet at this time.
All right, now this is also a follow-up to that. In the 1960s, you needed a PhD, social standing, institutional affiliation to be taken seriously in this field. Today, however, 15-year-olds with an internet connection can be players, or Christian activists with an alien resistance coffee shop and a message. What have been the consequences for ufology as a whole from the perspective of both established and new researchers in the field?
I guess somebody was probably referencing me with the 15-year-old comment. I did start this when I was 15, and honestly, I got a little negative undertone to the question, meaning I kind of felt like it's bad that people without PhDs or degrees or even being older than 15 is hurting the field. That's kind of how I got. I don't know if that's what the question really intended. However, I don't see that as a problem at all. I see, you know, me being 15, I was ignored by a lot of people in the field. Not necessarily maliciously, but they didn't think that somebody my age would actually take this seriously. Now I have the honor of calling some of these people my friends, but it was true that I was ignored. But I hope that I proved to them that I stuck around. And I don't have a PhD, that's true, but the information that I got out there, I didn't need one to get it. And nobody needs to say that it's not true or to dismiss it because I'm not Dr. John Greenewald. So I believe that in that respect, it's helping, that we don't need just those in the field, though they incredibly help out, and they're very, very intelligent, more so than I on very many fronts. However, I think it's more powerful for the field that you have a younger set of eyes, an older set of eyes, an intelligent set of eyes, one that doesn't have the same training set of eyes. And you put all those eyes into something, you get more ideas. And when you get more ideas out there, you get more answers. And I think that's what's being accomplished right now with so many people in the field. And I hope that more 15-year-olds come out. That's what MUFON is trying for right now to get, not necessarily 15, but people from the younger generation in there. And I, for one, hope that they do it because I stuck around and I'm not going anywhere.
I got to give you an example of backing this one up for sure. I talked to David and I talked to John both about some cases that I've had for quite some time. I mean, I'm much older than both of them are. But these cases, I've had the information, but no way to research it. I haven't had the tools. Along comes these young guys, and all of a sudden I get to see them actually do a talk, and I'm going, wow, these guys know how to dig. They know where to dig. They've got the tools to dig with. I don't. I came into the MUFON as an investigator. My job was to report these sightings, do the best I could to dig the information up, and hopefully somebody else was there to help me to get to the answers that I needed to get for specific cases. Well, obviously there weren't the right people there that I needed to get answers on these particular cases for. I heard the access that these guys got for information, and I thought, you know, it's been 10 years that these cases have been around, and they're still going to be there. After listening to John, I heard that history doesn't go away. It's recorded in there somewhere. And I know your access and what you've been able to do with photography and stuff. And I've been sitting on this stuff, but didn't know what to do with it, didn't know where to go with it. And along comes these young guys, and you're damn right I'm going to give it to them, because I still need answers for these cases. And if these guys can do it, if they got the tools to do it, I'm going to give it to them.
I just want to add that the question itself is not necessarily an accurate one anyway. It's not clear to me that there are fewer PhDs in terms of percentage among UFO researchers today than, say, 30, 35 years ago. I mean, there are a lot of excellent UFO researchers who do not have PhDs, who do, a number of poor researchers who don't, and in my opinion, who do, of all eras. When I look at the overall quality of UFO research today, in general, I think it's often of exceptionally high quality that is being put out. And so I think it's actually a question based on what appears to be mistaken assumptions.
I need this, please. Well, yeah, mistaken assumptions. More importantly, the question, I'm afraid, doesn't understand the history here properly. And this needs to be clarified. It's a very important point here. First of all, in the beginning, all right, there were plenty of, in fact, in the very beginning of the modern era of ufology, which is a term I absolutely hate and want to see buried and put away forever, you had plenty. It was mostly non-PhDs. In fact, you went through what is called the Space Brothers period, and there's a lot of populism in there. People were going out in the desert and they were coming to rocks. There was an effort to bring science into it, absolutely, which was totally appropriate. That effort was led by James McDonald, who had all the credentials. He had it all. There's no scientist in this field today that was stronger than he was. And he did everything he could, and ultimately it failed. We went through another period, kind of a languishing period, and then things started to reemerge. But the fact is that the issue never had anything to do with whether you had a PhD or not. It did not matter, all right? This has been a political issue from the beginning. You can have all the PhDs you want, you're not going to get to the Holy Grail, whether that's true of James McDonald, or whether it's Peter Sturrock, or whether it's Dr. John Mack. In fact, you can throw a Pulitzer Prize in and go to matter. Because this wasn't about PhDs. The one thing we can say is that the era of the internet made it easier for people to do higher quality research, thus expanding the power of the citizen science movement, which is why America is such a great country, because if the PhDs get throttled for some reason, then average people step forward and do a remarkable job. Okay? And America makes that possible, which is why it's a great country, all right? But what really happened, right, and this is the thing that I'm going to be driving home every chance I get, right, it's something that governments have done repeatedly, empires have done. It's a very common and very powerful technique. You control your constituents and you manipulate history by isolating people, ideas, or both from the mainstream culture. It's called ghettoization. And often it's mostly the ghettoization of an idea. But in fact, taken far enough, you actually ghettoize whole peoples. And I think we know all about that story, and we don't need to go there. The government knew this. And so, since the extraterrestrials kept turning up all the time and everywhere, which created a bit of a problem for them. Meaning, how do you? It's like trying to keep the stealth bomber secret, but some guy working in maintenance keeps hauling the thing out in the middle of the night and flying it around. You know, it would really kind of make it hard. So you got to find some other way to keep people from looking at something and actually seeing it or acting upon it. So what you do is you ghettoize them. You create a wall of ridicule around it, which they started doing right away at 47. And once you've got the whole wall created, then every single person, no matter who they are, whether it's a space brother or a PhD scientist or anyone, you toss them over the wall, all right? Along with the evidence, the books, the papers, everything, the journals, you toss it over the wall. You round it up, you toss it over the wall. Now, once you get it inside the ghetto, all right, and you've got a ridicule around it, you now have associated this sense of ridicule with everything in it. All right? And therefore, you have isolated all of that from the rest of the culture. So the rest of the culture is reluctant to speak to those people, read their books, read their magazines, hire them, give them money, give them press, give them the time of day. And it's very effective. All right? If you look at the Jewish ghettos of the 1930s, late 1930s, in there were concert violinists, PhDs in physics, some of the finest writers in the world, as well as just everyday Jews and gypsies and others, and they were all lumped together and they were all the same. It's a very powerful technique. That technique is one of the reasons why this cover-up has to end, because it's so vile and so venal that for the American government to do it in any way, shape, or form is unacceptable for any reason. It's unacceptable. It's disgusting, right? That's why we have to break that wall down, climb over it, tunnel under it, smash it to the ground, because it's completely unacceptable. And so whether you are a PhD in 1949 or whether you are a Harvard Pulitzer Prize winner in 1992, your problem is not whether you have enough degrees or whether you have access to the internet. Your problem is that you're in the ghetto that the national security state of this country created for you to make sure that you do not enlighten the rest of the public to information which, if they knew, would make certain individuals of the state uncomfortable. That's the way the question has to be posed.
I'd like to point out Mexico here because most of the answers that we heard on CNN and Fox were from our PhDs, and they're the ones who gave us swamp gas, ball lightning, and possibly balloons in the case of the Mexico UFOs. If that's the best that our university physicists, PhDs, could do on the case of Mexico, I would say it's an embarrassment to our universities. Also, I'd like to point out that Einstein was a college dropout for the very reason that he wanted to get out of the box, the current box that science put him in. Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest electrical engineers of all time, was not a dropout, but he was not a PhD. He got to a certain level of education in Yugoslavia and came to America. And some of the greatest thinkers, and I think the movie Good Will Hunting pointed this out, the universities don't have the patent on higher learning and knowledge. We can read books. In my case, I was a fly on the wall to many of the greatest PhDs and physicists of our time. When I asked Murray Gell-Mann, who's considered one of the greatest scientists since Einstein, to look at the NASA tapes, no way would he comment on it. In fact, I pointed out in my lecture why mainstream physicists don't get involved with UFOs, because now, I mean, Einstein was trying to get out of the box, but he also put us in a box that said nothing could go faster than the speed of light and mass could not attain it. I decided to go out of Einstein's box, and one day in the future people will go beyond what I'm saying in getting out of Einstein's box. So I don't think the universities are necessarily, they're good institutions. I mean, some of the finest minds do come out of our institutions. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying there are certain limits, and sometimes universities tend to put us in boxes that there's just no way we can get out, and individuals get frustrated. And in the case of UFOs, with so many witnesses, so many abductions, and to have universities deny that they exist, our mainstream universities are not researching the phenomena, but in China and Russia they are. Are we making a mistake by our PhDs not engaging in this subject? I really believe we are, but as we pointed out, even Stanton Friedman, by the way, I asked him the other day, does not have a PhD in physics. He's a free thinker. And it's a lot of free thinkers are attracted to this subject for that very reason, is that the mainstream education institutions in this country will not comment or do deep studies into this subject. And when you get answers from them like we got in Mexico, it's laughable. It's laughable what they're saying, and that's why I'm here. Contributing from a scientific perspective as a free science thinker.
I'm going to argue the downside of it. I'm going to tell you why it's a horrible thing, actually. Because when we live in a world where religious idiots and teenagers can share their opinion and be widely influential, all of a sudden that puts the burden on you to read the material, engage your brain, and see if these guys are telling the truth or not. All of a sudden now you have to see who endorses, see what their affiliations, see what their fellowships are, see what other critical thinkers, PhDs or not, have said about them. But main thing is it puts the burden on you to use your brain for a little while and see if this makes sense. John didn't get his information from a PhD, he got it from the government files. I got mine from personal experience in the Bible. That's real dangerous when people like that can have a voice. It's extremely dangerous, because now you've got to go and figure out if what we're saying is true or not, rather than being told by your government, your church, and your educational institutions what you're allowed to believe and what information you are and are not allowed to have access to. That's a damn shame.
Things are getting so impassioned that it's coming off here. Yeah, more tape, more tape. Okay. Yeah, you got some there. Yes. Okay, high technology. All right. This is also, again, it follows up here, and I'm going to read both of these questions together. The second one, Stephen, is to you. The first one, anybody can chime in on. First one, how do political and legal efforts led by the Sci-Fi Channel fit within other disclosure efforts, and what are the implications of a corporate media entity with fiction in its title engaging in direct political lobbying? That's the first one. Second one, Stephen, to you. On Saturday night, you mentioned that you believe disclosure would occur by next April. Can you elaborate why you feel it'll happen so soon, given the thus far unwavering denial of the government? Anybody want to handle or just, okay, John?
I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day about how the Sci-Fi Channel's investigation was going, and as I can't really speak on behalf of that organization or on behalf of what they're really currently finding, I honestly believe that the name will hurt a little bit. And I always hate to throw negativity into it, but the reason why, and my show for the Black Vault is a tough sell, meaning, you know, who wants to put the government's closely guarded secrets on television? Now, for me, what if the Sci-Fi Channel said yes? I would personally, and this is not against what the Sci-Fi Channel is or stands for or the quality of their programming. However, if you put the Black Vault on television with verified documents, with verified information, on the Sci-Fi Channel, do you think the general public that doesn't sit in this room and is not up here on this panel or is acquainted with this information will believe it? No, I don't believe so. Now, everything that I would put on that show is 100% verified by what the United States government says. However, Science Fiction Channel was the one that picked it up. Why? So people in the general public will dismiss that, and I've leaned away from pitching the Sci-Fi Channel. I've leaned away from working heavily with, though I mean I have worked on a couple shows with the Sci-Fi Channel. Like I said, I'm not degrading their quality of programming, but that name to the general public enriches analogy, the 80-20, I think you said, which I would even say it's the 95-5 scenario, where 95% of the people really do just listen to those media outlets, and I think that name itself, the Science Fiction Channel, will hurt not only my documentation, but any developments on the Kecksburg incident. So when that public sees it, unfortunately, I will think that they will dismiss it. And I hate to throw that negativity in there, but I actually believe that will hurt it.
Okay. I have several thousand words to say about this. I am extremely knowledgeable about the Sci-Fi Channel and CFI. How can I start? First and foremost, there is nothing wrong with a corporation creating an entity and/or providing money to other entities which pursue matters of social, political concern. Nothing at all. All right? For one thing, individuals have great limits on the degree of which they can fund things. All right? So you may personally feel that the ozone hole shouldn't get any bigger. How many millions of dollars have you got to contribute it toward getting it smaller? All right. So if a major corporation were willing to create an entity that would put $50 million into looking at the ozone issue, and it did it in an open way so that you could assess whether somehow their social effort was either biased or serving a self-interest, that's a good thing. There's no problem with that, right? Point one. Point two, as someone that's been dealing with the media on this issue for 8 years, I can assure you that ABC, CBS, NBC, the Learning Channel, talk with the head of the Learning Channel myself, Discovery Channel, every single channel has had the opportunity to create all the programs they want, to engage this issue any way they want, and they've generally chosen to take an extremely narrow view. The three major networks have done so little, it's going to be one of the great embarrassments of journalistic history. I mean, they'll be trying to explain that for years. The Fox network is a little bit out in front, but not to the degree of doing anything significant. So if they don't do it, and the Sci-Fi Channel wants to do it, well, that's better than nothing, right? That's point two. Point three. Sci-Fi Channel has done something pretty interesting here, and the implications are not fully known, which is why I take every opportunity to say what they are in front of any camera that will put itself in front of me. They created a separate entity called the Coalition for Freedom of Information. They put a reasonable firewall between it. They put some money behind it, and they hired people to work it who were not working directly for Sci-Fi. And the whole thing was put together with the help of a public relations person by the name of Larry Landsman. And the goal was to add a public service perspective and action that was somewhat connected to the kind of content that was on their network. So they stood to benefit from it. Just like a corporation that helps close that ozone hole is going to benefit possibly too. I mean, all those people don't want to get skin cancer. So what you need to know about their social activist project, the Coalition for Freedom of Information, what is important for you to know and tell your friends is this, because this is what they did. And it's very significant, all right? They formed a separate entity and created a website. That entity's role was to pursue documents and information with respect to cases, right? Which would have been something, but then they got really good, interesting. They decided to focus that organization on Washington. In order to represent the organization's interests, they hired a public relations firm, which is what every organization in Washington does that wants to influence government. The public relations firm they chose was Podesta Mattoon. That's significant, founded by Anthony Podesta, right? Then they hired a law firm that would do some of the operational work, particularly in the case of FOIA requests. That law firm was Nobel, Lobens, and Lamont, or Lamont, Nobel, and Lobens, and that was a K Street law firm, very powerful, right? Then, to have sort of a person that would be kind of a spokesperson, not directly connected, not under a paycheck, but a spokesperson, they got Anthony Podesta's brother, John Podesta, to take that role. They announced a press conference in the year 2002, stating what they were going to do, and that press conference was opened up by John Podesta, who stated in front of a camera that it was time to get the UFO documents out to the public, release information. Right, move this on, basically end the cover-up. Right, there were 3 reporters, 3 or 4 reporters, and it's actually 3 reporters in the room at the time, even though they'd been given plenty of notice, and he was the former chief of staff to President Clinton. Okay, then 1 year went by, and after making a number of FOI requests regarding certain key cases, running at least 2, maybe 3 documentaries on the Sci-Fi Channel, along with follow-up, raising the issues, raising the cases. They held another press conference exactly 1 year later, in which they announced that they weren't getting the documents they wanted, and they were going to file suit against NASA. John Podesta came in and opened that press conference and repeated again that we needed to get the documents out, all right? Now, I think you can see right away that what they have done here is not something that other organizations have done. NICAP didn't do this, MUFON didn't do this, CUFOS didn't do this. Nobody had done this, all right? But it gets better and better and better. Point 5, John Podesta then, for that 1 year period, was publicly connected with the release of UFO documents and ending the cover-up. He is the former chief of staff to President Clinton, one of the key aides during his first term. He's a power player in Washington. He's connected, wired into the Democratic National Committee, and he's frequently called on television to make commentary. And this is in Washington, D.C., where destroying people is considered high art. And if anybody can get an angle on you and they have a chance to influence presidential politics, they will cut you up so fine that Benihana couldn't serve you on a muffin. He was untouched. Nobody so much as went boo to John Podesta. But it gets better, because John Podesta is a very smart man, very ambitious man with big plans. And so roughly in that same 1 year time period, John Podesta it was already kind of in the planning stages 4 or 5 months before the first 2002 press conference that the Sci-Fi CFI put on. He began organizing and developing the creation of a new think tank, a progressive think tank, to counter the growing influence of the conservative think tanks such as the Heritage Foundation and Cato Institute. And in order to create a think tank, you need money, lots of it. So he went out and he got a bunch of people to put up $25 million, all right? Then he went on the press conference and said we need to open up the UFO documents. And nobody took their money out. And he continued that development until they were ready to announce the emergence of the Center for American Progress, a brand new left-of-center progressive think tank funded by $25 million, 3 of which came from billionaire George Soros, whose #1 issue is open government. He has an Open Government Institute which funds open government initiatives all around the world. And $3 million to George Soros is basically lawn care money. All right? And he goes on camera again. By the way, they film all this stuff and then they stick the stuff up on their website. So, I mean, it's guaranteed to get around. And he does his second stint at the second press conference, again talking about ending the cover-up and getting the documents out. And 8 days later, they formally open the Center for American Progress, and still John Podesta is untouched. I defy any of you who have read or heard on radio or seen on television one disparaging word pointed at John Podesta by anybody in the Republican Party who would like to see he, his ilk, the Clintons, and the rest of the Democrats wiped off the face of the earth. One word directed at him, attacking him because he had taken a stand on UFO documents. That is incredibly interesting, isn't it? All right? All of that happens because the Sci-Fi Channel launches the CFI, Coalition for Freedom of Information project. All right? Now, it is my belief that John Podesta is positioning himself for disclosure. It is my belief that the major players in Washington on the Republican side know disclosure is coming. And for them to then attack him on that issue makes them look like complete idiots when it happens, doesn't it? All right? I believe that other players in Washington are aligning themselves. I believe major financial interests like Steven Spielberg and certain, and like Jeff Sagansky, former president of TriStar Pictures, and Dan Aykroyd, and other corporations are aligning themselves for disclosure. And because the and let me add once again that everything I just told you was generally not covered by any press at all. The Washington Post didn't send a reporter to either press conference. They don't consider it news that the top aide for Clinton and his former chief of staff is now pressing for UFO disclosure. There's no story there. They'll have to answer for that too. And then the piece de resistance for this little scenario is this, that in the first 3 years of the Clinton administration, John Podesta was a key aide to Clinton, operating right there in the White House. He was there when Lawrence Rockefeller, through his lawyer, Henry Diamond, formally approached John Gibbons, who was the head of the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House, in other words, Clinton's science advisor, with the invitation, not the invitation, but the request that meetings begin immediately so that Lawrence Rockefeller could eventually meet with the president to discuss ending the UFO cover-up. I know this because, thanks to Grant Cameron and others, but mostly Grant Cameron, I have 900 pages of documents, including the letters between all the parties, confirming all of this. And as this moved forward, it lasted about 18 months, right? A process was underway leading for Clinton to become the disclosure president with the help of Lawrence Rockefeller. It is my opinion that a considerable portion of the reason why Clinton was attacked in every conceivable way by the right, funded by Richard Mellonscaith, was not because he was committing adultery. Most of the right is committing adultery, right? In fact, a number of the people that formally went after him publicly were found to be committing adultery and had to resign, including Livingston, Gingrich, and others. It didn't have anything to do with that, and it didn't have to do with Watergate, which is a financial scandal in the Republican world would be considered small change. It's almost embarrassing. In fact, I had people in Washington tell me the problem with Clinton is not that he does these things, he gives adultery and financial scandals a bad name because they're so pathetic. We know scandals, and when we commit adultery, we damn well keep it to ourselves. Clinton was attacked because he was consorting and listening to people of power and influence that wanted to end the UFO cover-up, and it scared the military intelligence complex silly. They were petrified because they hated him, and they thought he was the absolute worst president. This story has yet to be told, but someday it will be told. And so while all of this approach by Rockefeller was going on, while meetings were being held at Rockefeller's ranch, while information was given to Rockefeller to pass on to Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton when they met with Rockefeller at his ranch, which they did every year, while meetings took place with Hillary herself, John Podesta sat in the White House and oversaw it all. And while clearly we know that Clinton did not become the disclosure president, and he was blocked and attacked, and things went different directions, what he did do, was sort of a bone to toss out, is that he tried to reform somewhat the classification schema and ended up releasing millions of documents, right? It's sort of his way of showing the faith. And you know who he assigned to orchestrate that reform of classification and release those documents? John Podesta, who then, right, approximately 7 years later, ties in with the Coalition for Freedom of Information, goes in front of the cameras of the National Press Club, and publicly puts himself into the disclosure process, backed by a billionaire who now is 1 degree of separation from the disclosure process, a man with enough money to fund 500 PACs and bring the cover-up down around the knees of the national security state and not even break a sweat. Now, whoever is listening to this, can you start to understand what I mean when I say disclosure is not only inevitable, but it is on us? It is going to happen now. And the reason I have to say this is because the New York Times is not going to say it, and the LA Times is not going to say it, and 98% of the people, 99% of the people in this country don't know anything about what I just said, even though it has those implications. That's the failure of the media. They will have to answer for that. I intend to make them answer for that. We'll be chasing them around like yapping dogs, you know, snatching their Pulitzer Prizes away from them, and driving them out of the business so they can be replaced with a fresh group of journalists that know what the hell journalism is. In other words, I can forgive the government. It had the national security in its mind when it started the cover-up, when it started the CIA. I cannot forgive the journalist anything. They compromised the very fundamental integrity and the rules upon which they function. They completely disregarded the reason why they did what they did. There are no excuses. And the fact that they did it puts us all at jeopardy because they can do it again. So while the government will get a pass from me, because we need to move forward, the media in this country will answer for their complicity in this cover-up. I make that promise to you. And now, oh, and by the way, go out and buy Terry Hansen's book, please. Buy 5 copies. Give it away for Christmas. Missing Times, News Media Complicity in the UFO Cover.
I'd like to comment just a little bit about the Sci-Fi Channel because I've had a few recent dealings with them, and they're very suspicious dealings. First, and Stephen Bassett had this experience also, Dan Aykroyd had a show called Out There on the Sci-Fi Channel. And Aykroyd, of course, has appeared in my film, and I'm personally friends with him. And have just interviewed, when Stephen said that Aykroyd was on the list for disclosure, I just did an 1 and 10-minute unplugged interview with Dan Aykroyd on his disclosure of the UFO phenomenon, his thoughts on it, which will be available in the next year. But the Sci-Fi Channel was, with Dan Aykroyd, had actually already filmed Stephen Bassett, and then went on to film Stephen Greer for Project Disclosure. And Dan told me during the taping of that episode, I don't know how they arranged this, but they were taping as if live, or they had people call in as if live, but James Oberg called in from NASA. And as we remember, when I was on the Art Bell show in 2000, arguing with James Oberg on the point about whether the cameras on the shuttle could see into the invisible, that was the moment that the broadcast was shut down, the satellite was turned off, and the internet was turned off, and they're not technically related systems. And the next day, Art Bell was told that national security had contacted him and said that we had to shut down your show last night because David Sereda was naming names and people at NASA and technology that the public is not ready for at this time. Now, Oberg is arguing with Stephen Greer, and Dan told me that he was very upset. He was getting into arguments that he could not solve. And during those arguments, are you? Yeah, I got a. You're having a sound problem? Yeah.
It's not going into the video, perhaps.
No. Boy, every time you try to say something, David, the tech goes down. And you're
right.
I mean,
Great observation. Deja vu.
Graviton. How much of that did we lose?
It's remarkable.
No, it's okay.
Okay, do you have sound now? Okay, so anyway, Aykroyd told me that there were stress tones in James Oberg at NASA over disclosure. And I was on my way to New York 3 days later to do my taping of the show out there. The show was canceled almost immediately after the incident with Oberg and Stephen Greer. And I proposed to Dan, I mean, this could not be a coincidence that Oberg once again gets involved and the show gets shut down. Maybe NASA and NSA didn't like the idea that Sci-Fi was doing a serious show about disclosure. I mean, and you know, NASA, UFOs, disclosure, and Stephen Bassett on the list. This wasn't comedy. This wasn't just mere entertainment for the public. It wasn't sci-fi. It was science reality. And that was not what they were expecting. A very mystical thing happened to Dan after that, which I won't go into. But very recently, I was approached by Josh Kessler at Sci-Fi for a show called Proof Positive. And they wanted to do a whole episode on me with the NASA UFO phenomena. They also they wanted to do Trevor James Constable, who's one of my researchers, and Martin Stubbs. When they found out that everything was very real in this case, and then they decided, well, let's contact James Oberg at NASA and interview him. And they're not in filming stages yet. This is just pre-planning. As soon as Oberg called them, he slammed the thing on the cameras. No, the cameras can't see into the invisible. And I have absolutely confirmed that fact with their physicists at NASA. I know everything about the cameras at NASA. They absolutely see in the infrared, absolutely in the near ultraviolet. That is undeniable. I got a call from the Sci-Fi Channel, and they were planning to be here for this conference. Sci-Fi was planning to be here to videotape myself and some of the other people here. They're also planning on being at MUFON in Denver. I got a call saying it's all canceled. Right after Oberg called in again. I mean, could this all be coincidence? Is Sci-Fi willing to just entertain the idea of disclosure, but when they see something very serious, they just seem to back down every single time? I believe, and Josh told me the show was called Proof Positive. I mean, they're looking for cases that can be proved 100% that we're dealing with UFOs. Is there one case that's ever been proven 100%? There's always room for doubt. So I told him that. I said, you're never going to prove this 100% until we have full disclosure. And in fact, when astronauts like Gordon Cooper, and you get guys like Jim White and John Schuessler, people like that from NASA who have come forward, the media still laughs at them. How did it happen when Stephen Greer disclosed in Washington testimony from airline pilots, Air Force pilots, and U.S. astronauts that these guys were all a joke? How does the media, how do we give them that much power that they could laugh at our astronauts, they could laugh at our pilots, and the giggle factor, make them look bad? How dare they have that much power over our people? But they do. The fact is they do. And right now I believe the Sci-Fi Channel, even though they say they're leaning towards disclosure, I was finally approached by Josh Kessler after I wrote him a really nasty letter for shutting me down to say that, well, they want to do a show, but they want it to be negative in the end, that these aren't really UFOs. So that's their bending intent.
All right, now we're going to veer back into maybe a little bit of more where we are here in this conference, but from what has just been said. As there are dangers in disclosure for social structure and economics, I feel there's a great danger in continuing prejudice and separation between Christians and metaphysicists. Just another religious war about UFOs and God. Who wants to comment?
Yeah, there's always dangers in prejudice. It's a horrible thing. I don't see that this conference has been an example of it, though, because I invited the Raelian religion to come and present, because I wanted people to hear what they had to say, and I wanted them to sit on this panel. Whether it's, like I said, we can have debates all we want over coffee about what your religion is or what your worldview is. We might even change each other's opinions over time. But happy 4th of July. I mean, this is America. And a lot of stuff we've talked on both the media, cable, You know, there's a thing called the First Amendment that we hold pretty dearly here. And there's also a thing that has to do with your ability to pursue happiness, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I think prejudice is awful. Part of what I did with this conference was just, please, for God's sake, try to tear down the wall of the natural, it's almost predatory. As I said earlier in the opening remarks, that the church and the UFO community seem as if they're natural enemies, and it's almost predatory. And with so many people, and Mike Heiser said that the UFO community wouldn't exist as a business if it weren't for the Christians that are at these conferences, because the interest is there. And one of the things I said is that if you went and talked to your pastor about UFOs or your abduction experiences, they'd run you off. The problem with the church is, aside from the obvious that you're not serving the world, that you're not honestly or biblically answering what has got to be the most important topic up for grabs of the 21st century, you're not meeting their felt needs, you're not meeting their real needs. Aside from the topic that you're not serving the world that you're called to love, you've got abductees and people with wrecked lives sitting in your pews that are afraid to even talk to you because you don't want to be called crazy. Aside from the obvious problem, you're not even taking care of your own. So, and then on the other side of it, Mike Heiser, Chris Ward, when we did this last year, Mike made the point, look what we're doing. We're spending money, and we're bringing people whose credible research we affirm into this thing. We did it last year with Richard Hochman. We invited him to the panel discussion. He didn't hear what had gone before it even. And he brought up a lot of honest, not really antagonistic, but just honest questions that we weren't afraid to debate. We've read Jacques Vallée. We've read the literature. You go down to my shop, the library of well over, I don't know, I've got a much huger library of non-religious secular UFO research all over the walls than I do biblical material. We're not afraid to engage. We're not afraid to read that material. The daunting question, though, is when was the last time you saw Mike Heiser once at the Bay Area UFO conference? I would say that. When was the last time you saw anybody here that's represented Orthodox biblical theology invited to headline, much less, or speak, or much less headline, at a secular UFO conference? That's where the prejudice lies. Who's afraid of who?
I'd like to say something too. I've been kind of a Christian activist for a number of years and involved in Christian apologetics. But going all the way back into the late 1980s, I would take out tables at New Age conferences. And I got to say this, that we were greeted as evangelical Christians with an incredible amount of hostility from the metaphysical people. I mean, it was startling, you know, just how much hostility. But on the other hand, a few people would listen to what we had to say, and that's all I think we want. And like what Guy was saying, that I think that the secular UFO community does tend to marginalize the biblical point of view.
I was almost confused by the question because it seems so non sequitur to me. The conundrum that Guy's been talking about, where the Christian community at large seems to be opposed to recognizing or admitting that there's a UFO phenomena and saying, okay, there's something here, let's look at it and let's acknowledge that there's, you know, a problem, you know, in our groups. That people are struggling with this experience. I ran into that a lot. I mean, where am I going to find a publisher for a book that talks about Christian ufology based on the Old Testament writings, and then you try to segue into the history of other cultures, you know, and say, well, you know, this matches what's being said by the ancient theologians. It matches what's being said, you know, hands down. There's nothing that's contradicting the people who are experiencing the UFO phenomena now and what was happening in the supernatural realm way back when. So, you know, metaphysics, paraphysics, supernatural, that's Christianity. It's a religious, spiritual manifestation. I don't see how those things contradict each other at all. I see that there is a problem with the institutionalized fundamentalist sort of Christianity. They're looking at some sort of alternative to biblical fundamentalism. They're looking away from the Bible and saying, well, I don't want to scare anybody because all of us agree in this certain calm, cool, and collected way. You know, let's not shake things up. It's about money. It's about keeping your flock together so that, you know, everybody can move through time without conflict. And they're dropping the ball. And that's where I think the conflict comes in, because if you see people having problems with the Christian community and their view of ufology, that problem came out of their own church. It's not the conflict between the metaphysic, secular side and the church. The church should be supporting this manifestation. They should be saying it exists, and they should be doing something about it. And I think this is the only conference of its kind on the planet, which is a good example of what I'm talking about.
I should add a few things here, since Guy sort of brought me into it. What I can't quite grasp is, you know, on the one hand, as I look at ufology, you have real nuts and bolts kind of researchers, people who are really serious about documentation and trying to understand if these are alien crafts, how do they work, approaching it scientifically. And then on the other side, you have, you know, for lack of a better term, I don't really like the term, but the New Agers. And I think part of the problem for the church is that the two get mixed, and I just don't see any reason that they need to be mixed. In other words, why does an extraterrestrial reality, if there are really ETs, why does that have to be metaphysical? Okay, I know, but so often at these conferences and in the literature, the lines are just blurred, and when you start messing with metaphysics and philosophy and theology, that deters, for many Christians to get involved. And if they do get involved, it sort of creates a launching pad of suspicion. You operate from a hermeneutics of suspicion when you try to get involved with this. And I just don't see a necessary connection between the two. I mean, if we are really talking about, or whatever, I mean, I just don't see why an extraterrestrial reality has to displace the spiritual, or even, you know, frankly, like you just said, Stephen, didn't have anything to do with it. And so, on the one hand, you know, I don't get invited to a whole lot of conferences, but you know, I seem to sort of get caught in both worlds, and I don't mind being caught in both worlds, but the question just nags me as to why do we even have this overlap. I think actually if the overlap wasn't there, more Christians would be encouraged, you know, to actually think about it. It just seems, I don't know if I'm expressing it well, but it just seems like such a conundrum to me. I don't know why all these things get mixed of necessity. I mean, you know, we've talked about visions, we've talked about Fatima, we've talked about, you know, all these other things that, you know, I think it was you, David, that said, you know, we'll get on, when Boyd said we'll move on to other subjects, you said like UFOs. That's sort of illustrative of what I'm saying. Now, I'm very willing to tackle the overlap and to discuss it and think about it, but I don't know why it has to be there. And I do agree with Guy that there is a fear factor on the part of what, again, for lack of a better term, secular ufology. Other than this venue and coast to coast, and I admire George Norrie for continuing to have me on, because I have a relationship with Art, and I was on with Barbara Simpson and Ian Punnett and now George, and I think George is, to me, the most courageous, because he's such a fan of Zecharia Sitchin, and he knows that I don't agree with that. But other than him having the integrity to actually have me on and ask me questions about Sitchin when I didn't even submit a single question about him, and that's all he wanted to talk about, There are shows, and if anybody wants to know, I'll give you the names, but there are people who just will not, over my dead body, will you be on my show? Because I object to what Zechariah Sitchin says. Like, that's the whole ball of wax. And so I do think there's a fear factor. I understand it in one respect, but I don't get it in another respect.
Hang on there. Okay. Amen, brother. No, what I would add to that also, I think everyone's got a lot of insightful points. I would like to point out, from my perspective, I'm not a biblically inclined UFO scholar. I do, for my part, think that there is a kind of bias against certain kinds of biblical approaches to this from what you might call a secular perspective, but I also have encountered what I feel from a scientific perspective is a certain level of ignorance from many Christian people who would argue with me about various subjects, including UFOs. So I think it cuts both ways. Having said that, I see nothing wrong with disagreements. I do not, for my part, really care if people agree with my position on things. What I care about is if my work helps spur them into original and productive thought. You know, you go into an academic environment, into a subject that is entirely acceptable to a culture such as American history. I mean, everyone teaches American history, all colleges have it. Go into a history department and you find the arguments among the professors raging over all kinds of minutia and all kinds of big issues too. These things do not get resolved. Sorry to say, the search for ideological unity is a foolish and forlorn hope. And let us not worry about that. Let us, in a pluralistic society, recognize that there are different ways of perceiving reality. But we can still appreciate what each other has to say if we recognize goodwill on all sides of this issue. And for the record, at UFO conferences that I have attended that are, let us say, not biblically focused, there is actually two cultures that are there. I have seen this every single time, and that's the kind of, as Mike pointed out, you get the sort of the nuts and bolts scientific document sorts of people, and then you might call the New Agers. They are present at all conferences that I have attended, and that's something that within these, you might, if you want to call it the secular UFO community, I don't think that's my best phrase, but that's something that we've all had to live with, and so there's really no way to resolve these things.
He's just got to change the tape.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, let Ted change the tape, and then then you can go.
I'm done.
Okay.
Well, oh, I definitely want to get on tape here. I'm not going tapeless.
Take like a 10 or 15 minute break, or just give him the 5 seconds he needs and keep rolling.
Okay, in 10 seconds. And you are live.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to the follow-up remarks of Mike and actually everyone in that corner. First and foremost, it's always, I think, a little bit risky. One has to be cautionary about it, to ascribe a word or phrase to someone's worldview, right? Which we do. We love to do it. We need to do it. I think if I was going to be described, the best phrase would be secular humanist. So I'm a secular humanist. And right now, it seems there are those that wish to convert us, which is fine. It's their prerogative. I have no trouble with it. And there are those that wish to wipe us off the face of the earth. I have a little more trouble with that. But as a secular humanist, let me give you my perspective on this conference, which is UFOs in the Bibles. All right? And this idea of UFO in the Bible, this linkage has been out there for some time, emerging on the internet, developing. So how do I view this? Actually, I view it a pretty straightforward way. One, it was inevitable. All right? Two, as an activist, not a researcher, as an advocate, I have to be very careful about taking sides. Why? Because this phenomena is engaging the planet, the entire planet. We know that. That's a given. They're seen all over the world, right? Every nation is involved in one way or another, and all peoples. And that's the Chinese, the Muslims, the Christians, everybody. So it's engaging the planet. So obviously, they're not here simply to talk to the Christians. Otherwise, they just fly over Christian nations. Everybody is going to have to deal with it. Everyone. Religious people, non-religious people, atheists, agnostics, secular humanists. All of them are going to deal with it one way or another. And they're trying. Everyone is responding in various ways. This is exactly what you would expect. And so is our society, and in particular, Christian segment of that society. Now, that was inevitable, if only because, logically, the appearance and confirmation of extraterrestrial beings, whatever their source, immediately raises the issue of the gods of the ancient times and the gods of all religions, which are all, with almost, except in certain pagan religions, pretty much of the sky, from above, all right? And immediately calls into question, is there a connection between the gods of religions from the sky and extraterrestrials? Any reasonable person would start looking into it. And religions are doing that. All right? Some religions are less centered that way. I think in China, and I think in the Asian religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Zen, and so forth, I doubt that they're approaching it that way. But even in their writings, you have this relationship to powerful entities from the sky. Fine. So this is going to be explored. It's inevitable, right, and appropriate. That's point one. Point two, after 8 years in the field, I'm very confident in saying, and I include the moderate religious element, I include the extreme evangelicals and everyone else. It is my view that the response of formal religion and the members of these religions has been the best of any organizations in our society. The response of religion to this issue was superior to the response of the university system, which of course was pathetic. It was superior to the response of the media, of the military and intelligence complex, of the elective bodies. If you take all, and corporations, well, actually corporations have made a fortune off it, so there of the elective bodies. If you take all, and corporations, well, actually corporations have made a fortune off it, so their response has been pretty good, but I don't want to lump them in here. In general, in terms of our fundamental institutions, religion's response has been overall the best. There's nothing terrible that's been happening. There's no war going on here. There's a religious war in the making, but it has nothing to do with extraterrestrials, and hopefully we will prevent that from happening, I hope. So nothing that's going on here is in any way either inappropriate or not predictable. It is in fact appropriate and exactly what you would expect. And not surprisingly, it's generating some extraordinary new thinking. It is in fact initiating a re-examination of the most fundamental texts in ways that are going to produce information that is going to excite millions of people. I predict that post-disclosure, church membership will go up dramatically. All right? I predict the evangelical right will not cause a problem. Furthermore, I would like to say on record that those members of the media and those people who have the public ear through radio and television who are going on their programs and constantly saying that members of the extreme right church or the evangelical church or the ultra-conservative church are going to behave so badly and so terribly because they're just so bound up that disclosure should not take place. In other words, we should not disclose these, at least what we know about this extraordinary situation, because a limited number of extreme evangelical Christians are going to behave badly. First of all, it's utterly insulting to the evangelical church. It's outrageously biased. It's not founded in fact, right? It's just obscene. And I want to say that very clearly, right? There is no evidence that any church in this world right now would do anything significantly destructive, enough to even remotely bring disclosure into question. And that bias is being put out there for reasons I don't fully understand. Some of it might be disinformation, again, to prevent disclosure from taking place. All right? And the other thing, going the other direction, and this is kind of from a personal point of view, is that I entered the field in '96 as a secular humanist right? With no formal interest in formal religion, certainly as a personal practice. Pretty set, pretty solid in my worldview, all right? And the effect of these 8 years is to loosen, not only loosen me up, but humble me. One thing I learned quite quickly is the universe is far more interesting, exotic, and bizarre, strange, and wonderful than I ever imagined, and therefore for me to try to put parameters around it is nuts, all right? And secondly, I began to see significant independent evidence which corroborated some things, perhaps even theological. And the most straightforward one, and I'll end with this, is that when you look at the abduction research, you know a couple of things. One, that the abductees ask questions of their hosts, you can call them, all the time, and most of the time they don't get any answers. That's one thing. But they do sometimes get answers, and one of the questions that's most frequently asked of these extraterrestrials is if they're a god. And as far as I know, there has never been any other answer but yes. And they don't say what kind of God. They don't say yes, it's a God and it's Christ or it's the Trinity or anything else or it's Allah. They simply say yes. Now that's significant, particularly for me, because remember this is a separate group of entities, we don't know where they're from, operating in this planet, being asked a question and then asking there is a God. This then becomes a completely independent corroboration of something that we've been dealing with here for a long time. They also show imagery, as I talked about in the keynote, on the sides of the wall. Sometimes they put those images right in people's heads. They talk about past lives, right? They talk about a number of things which would be called very, very somewhat spiritual. And so this introduces a whole new genre of evidence which has to be examined. So all I see ahead of us is a truth-telling process that will lead to re-examination of a considerable portion of human history, religious text. People will flock to the church, people will go to school to study, they will be incited, they will be excited, and we'll move forward as a species. We'll have a few problems, but gee, I think we have a few problems right now. This is all good. There's no downside here. I don't see it yet, all right? And so I hope that, well, first of all, I hope that this subject matter now blows out into the general mainstream public and we start seeing it on shows, right? Because it's going to draw millions of people into this area and have them reflect. So it's going to expand the public awareness of this ET reality, whatever it is. That's all very good. And it's going to close the circle to some degree. So there's something very profound going on here. What you have is a major institution in American life stepping forward and saying, of course, this needs to be looked at. Now we need the American media to follow suit, the universities to follow suit, the United States government to follow suit. And I think it'll only be to the credit of the Christian church or any other church that they were ahead of the game and they were there first. All right? They could look back on that with great pride. So that's how I view it as a secular humanist. And again, I don't see any problems here, and I don't see any contentions or any issues. I know that one-on-one people can argue all day, but so what? That's new. Nothing new about that. All right? I think when all is said and done, not all, but 10, 15 years from now, when we look back, we will discover that nobody had it right. Nobody had it all right. That's impossible. That all of us had a little part of it right, right? And when you take the collective and piece all those pieces together, you get the mosaic. And then we'll be looking at a pretty good sense of reality that wasn't known prior to 1947 or even 1980, and we will be astounded. We will be thrilled. It'll be amazing. And while it won't be the certainty we won't have an absolute certainty as to the way the world is, we will have a new level of understanding that will just be extraordinarily profound. And hopefully we'll be humble enough to acknowledge where we had it wrong, humble enough to acknowledge those who had it right, right, and share in this new world. That's what's ahead of us, and I think it's within 10 years, right? And we'll get to have that luxury of looking back. That's why I'm going to take my vitamins, try to get back into running a couple of miles a day so I can stick around, because I don't want to miss this, all right? And I hope you all are there with us when that happens.
Anybody else want that? Okay.
Who's up? Where? There we go. I'm getting, well, I tell you, I'm not just running off right now.
This was a good, this was a good question. I saw the question coming a few days ago. It just didn't show up when I thought it was supposed to show up, which was yesterday at the end of my talk. Where was it? That's when it should have shown up. But I questioned, why didn't it show up? And I have a feeling why, is because I came into this conference with a specific talk. What was my talk, Guy? To share my research. That's specifically all it was. I happen to be a MUFON state section director. I happen to be a Christian. I happen to have done a specific piece of research. That's why I came here, to share my research. But when certain people, I guess, realized that I was a Christian, I must have been biased, I must have been one-sided, but that's not the way I came at this research. I came at this research as a MUFON investigator. I mean, what if I was a Muslim MUFON investigator, and this is still what I found? What if I was a Hindu MUFON investigator, but I still found the same thing? But no, the problem came when I said I was a Christian UFO investigator. I wasn't biased against anybody else. The bias came when I said I was a Christian. And when you took me, whoever tried to talk to me wanted to go outside and get into opinion, that's where we ran into a problem. We'll argue all day long. Absolutely, it's great to do that. I love the headbutt, it's great. But sticking to the research itself, the question wasn't here after I shared my research. Because that wasn't about opinion, that was about research, okay? The problem came when they wanted to talk, what was your opinion on this or that? But let's keep that outside. I mean, if you're a Muslim and you're a researcher, bring your research in, let's hear it, we need to hear it. But we can leave who we are personally outside of that.
On that vein, the UFO phenomenon is worldwide. It's worldwide, earthwide. It's not just about who's researching it, who it's happening to. It's a question everybody needs to have answered. The thing that I've noticed in ufology, just coming kind of new onto the scene, is the backbiting involved is just ridiculous. We're all here for a goal. Our goal is to unite as human beings, Christian, non-Christian, secular, humanist, la, 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 la. We're just human beings. We want answers. We want to know what is going on. There's a phenomenon happening. And so let's put the egos aside and let's work together and let's tackle this subject honestly with professionalism and respect.
I would like to say that I am a traditional Roman Catholic, a practicing Roman Catholic. And always before, the evangelical Christians had bothered me because I was studying UFOs. And I have letters in my personal files from in-laws which say that you had better watch it out, and because you are going to hell because you are investigating UFOs. And this was the idea I had about fundamentalist Christians, evangelical Christians. But I am absolutely delighted to meet everyone here, Christian, fundamentalist, secular humanist even, because you are all wonderful, and I think we're finally coming together.
So you want to get to those two questions?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you want to?
Actually, Joe and Ann both brought up something. I got a little too ahead of actually saving the day and on a high horse when I accused the other side, so to speak, of prejudice. And the bias you ran into, we can't pretend for a minute we don't bring that on ourselves. We got attitudes, we're not educated, we don't know what we're talking about when it comes to ufology. And when we, as the church, present ourselves the way we do to people that take this stuff seriously, with hysteria and histrionics, the bias we run into, I've experienced the hostility at the conventions that Bill talked about, but without exception, there's always people there that were glad that we were there. Me alone, Chris, you, Jim. They were glad we were there. Individuals were, but the hostility's there too. But I'm not going to pretend for a second that the Christian church doesn't deserve the bias that's been held against them either.
In just a moment, I'll have you guys restate those questions that you wanted the panel to do. But I think this is a very important question. And, you know, of course, those that are coming from the Christian biblical viewpoint sure chime in, but I would really like to hear from others too, because this says, what might it take to get either the denominational or non-denominational churches to teach about these non-mainstream teachings that we've been hearing in this conference? And you know, I would add to that, if you were going to go to a church and you know, you're thinking, hey, I'd like to be a part of this church, what would you look for in this area? What does a church need to offer in this area?
What it'll take is a fairly well-organized conference with some of the best people in the world to cover the topic, and a top-notch video and DVD staff. Thanks very much to all of you. It's going to be worldwide.
Of course, that was a little facetious, but in a local church, though, think in a local church setting. Did you have?
I was the executive director for about 4 years of a ministry known as Evangelical Ministries of New Religions, and it was a coalition of apologists that cut across Protestant denominations, and there were some Roman Catholics involved as well. But we would sponsor yearly conferences, and when I was executive director, I would always work the UFO issue into this as well. And so you would have seminary professors coming out. And in recent years, they've been holding their annual conferences at seminaries, and so it is being taken more and more seriously these days at a denominational level. The Southern Baptist denomination, for example, has a full-time religion specialist that has begun looking into UFOs. But I agree with what Guy was saying, and I know from publishing in the evangelical press books about UFOs, the quality isn't really that high to a certain degree. I like to think my books are high quality, but there's some good books out there, but really it's taken a long time for evangelicals to write books about UFOs. And then you run into the evangelical press. Who's going to publish them, you know? Baker Bookhouse published my 2 books in UFOs, and they were really hesitant about doing it. And fortunately, I think, with the Heaven's Gate book that I did, it happened right after the Heaven's Gate suicide, so there's a financial incentive. But I think a lot of evangelicals are cautious people, and this stuff, we got to face it, this stuff is weird. And a lot of people in the church don't really want to deal with weirdness. They really don't want to deal with it, and that's one of the problems.
Okay. Yes, yeah.
Not a long spiel.
Good.
I think the answer to that question, the simplest answer to that question, because I think the question implies that what is it going to take for these kinds of things to be taught around the country in most churches, right? In other words, mainstream. No. It's going to take disclosure, right? It's not going to happen until disclosure, period. It's just not possible. Now, so what's important about that point? This. Don't think in terms, and a lot of people make this mistake. Once we get every single reporter writing a story about this, once we get every university with, teaching, once we do this one, and then we're going to have disclosure. No, it's the other way around. You get disclosure by finding the points where you can break through, and the dam opens, right? Okay. And the reason you do that is so these things can start entering all these other institutions. So the way to look, I think, at the church right now is don't set as a goal that we need to teach lots of interesting more things in all the church. That's fine. What you just want to do is just keep spreading the word, holding conferences, talking to other people. And the reason you do that is not, quote, to drive disclosure as much as it is to establish a reasonable base of knowledge so that when disclosure takes place, there's a reasonable number of people who can step forward and lead the discussions. And there's a lot of the pre-disclosure activity we've been going through is not just to break the wall and finally get the truth out. That would be easy and almost trivial. Most of this work has to do with preparing the American people, because that's where we're operating here, but by extension the world's people, for the event, right? So that they can deal with it in the best possible way, as opposed to having no knowledge at all and suddenly one day, boom, it hits them in the head like a freight train. We don't want that. I don't want disruption. We don't want chaos. The disclosure movement is about minimizing the discomfort of transition as it is forcing the transition. I think that's a realistic approach, and that's why I do it in the church.
You know, I have to go on what Guy said. I hope this conference is a start for this, where we can reach the church. And I just got to let you guys know that are non-Christian, but whatever you are, the work that you guys have done, okay, is going to be the actual foundation. I said this in my talk yesterday. Richard, David, John, I said yesterday, it took me 2 years, even as an investigator, to be convinced that the phenomenon was real. I needed to take the time to see everything I could. What you guys put together in 5 or 6 hours' time, you cannot walk away from there believing that this doesn't exist. And you guys aren't the church, but you guys are going to open the door where we can do our job in the church. You guys are going to do this for us. And you're here. You've already done it. You did it this weekend.
One other quick thing. This is an important point. What we're seeing here is we're seeing, well, okay, the UFO conference, UFO, God, I hate that. Extraterrestrial phenomena conferences, and by the way, X conference, if it takes place, is going to do this, right? And I'm already sniffing out some possible candidates. I won't name names. The UFO need to invite, right, 1 or 2 individuals who are looking at this through the religious prism, right? They need to start including them in their conferences. And church groups need to start thinking about inviting some of the researchers in the UFO phenomena to come in and talk. Obviously, not everybody's going to do that, but that can be done immediately. And you always need new speakers, right? You hear the same thing over and over again. So I think you're going to start seeing people like Mike Heiser and David Flynn and others getting invites to these conferences and vice versa, right? And that's at minimum, we can do that. And it'll be fun, right? And we need more audience.
Well, I didn't want to be redundant, but, you know, probably a long time people have wondered, well, why don't pastors get involved in this stuff? And sometimes you guys, from a secular point, have been maybe even demonized or victimized by, you know, a prejudiced or prejudged attitude about venturing into the whole UFO realm. Well, it is because of your research and your work and predecessors, because I'm a little bit older, but you guys helped me supply information that I needed to be able to go back to the scriptures and see how it did all fit in. If I hadn't had your research and your efforts, I'd still be in a pulpit somewhere not knowing a thing about it. So, I mean, this is a first step forward. We're getting 2 camps together that in the past have appeared to be opposed to each other, and we begin working together. We begin establishing dialogue. I think we have one piece of the puzzle, you guys got another. When we get together, we'll get the whole picture, and then we'll have disclosure.
Connecting the dots is available.
I was thinking about the merit of what you said, John Greenewald, about not putting some empirical reality on someplace. The venue said sci-fi. But on the other hand, to suffuse whatever media you can with truth, with the presupposition that those people who listen to it are going to be critical and intelligent enough to be able to discern that, is something that I think part of the internet, you know, the internet is actually promoting, because, like I think you were saying, there's so much out there. You're forced to have to start thinking for yourself, and now you have the tools to do it. And a good example, I first saw Richard Hoagland's work on an Inquirer magazine, very first time in a Safeway. Yeah. You know, and yeah, I see this Inquirer and I think, you know, I never picked this thing up. I would never buy it, and I didn't that time either. But at least I thought, hey, there's this guy. He's written a book. I actually mentioned it. So I went to the bookstore and I searched all through the scientific category, the physics section, because that's where I thought it was going to be. And couldn't find it. And on my way out, in the fiction section, the sci-fi section, I found his book. It's not fiction at all. But I ended up with it, and I understood its relative merit and its veracity, and, you know, I forgot that it was found in the fiction section. And I think that's just going to happen a lot more. So, not that I would just jump at any opportunity, you know, for someone to burlesque what I'm doing, because it's very easy to do once you say something, and then they, you know, some media can take whatever they want, put it in whatever context they want to, and they can obscure it and obfuscate it. You know, it's easy to do. But most times you do have some control over it. You just go for it, because the more that's out there, you know, the climate is right. Okay.
As far as the internet, of 80 prepaid registrants, I think 4 did not learn about this conference on the internet. So it's got its downside, but it's got its upside too.
Okay, Guy, before you state those 2 questions again, or
9? 4 to 9 is the latest. Okay, we got 25 minutes.
okay, all right.
So I would rather those 2 do what I said.
Oh, okay, you want to do that? Okay, all right, we'll throw these aside on disclosure then.
Yeah, let me state that for them, or for the video anyway. And if you guys want to let anyone else comment, talk amongst yourselves. They've got to compare notes. I'll say it for the video, they've already heard it, is I am personally pro-disclosure. It would cause a measure of social chaos. So the question here, with inviting Stephen Bassett, who's in the last 8 years of his life have been to get the government and the media to tell the truth about this, there is a downside to disclosure as well, that while Richard has said he is pro-disclosure, from what I've seen, he can very intelligently argue that downside as well. So they're not going to be mad at each other as they do this, but I would like to both of them summarize or state as best they can. What's the up and the downside to it? Fresh shot here.
I love to talk big picture. I just thrive on the big picture. The small picture is so tough. You know, like paying the rent, that's small picture. I hate that. Big picture, right? Somebody comes, where's the rent check? I'm sorry, I'm thinking about the big picture. I can't give it to you right now. Here's why it is, in the shortest words possible, and I'm going to probably herniate myself doing this, here is why disclosure has to take place, in the fewest words possible. Think of the human race as an evolving entity, all right, going through a development process that involves wisdom and emotional maturity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all right. Think of the world as a finite place, which it is, well, at least the temporal world, and it's a sphere. Circumstances have brought us to this point in the year 2004. We were at this point really in 1978, 80. In which we have used up the limits of the finite sphere, right, and technologically surpassed our emotional maturity. So we arrived very rapidly, right? Sometimes that happens, right? We arrived very rapidly at a point where our numbers, due to our penchant for procreation, challenge the limits of the planet. Our use of its resources challenge the environmental biosphere that surrounds the planet. We have put the planet and environment at risk. And we've developed technologies which our lack of emotional sophistication are capable of being used at any time. We are a danger to ourselves, all other living creatures, the planet itself. In other words, we're just about ready to drive right over the cliff. It's that simple. And I don't consider myself some deep, dark nihilist. I don't sit around reading Nietzsche in the bathroom, all right? The fact is, that's just the way that it is. And if you don't think that, I can show you government reports from our own government that show this. You don't have to just go to the Club of Rome. It's all over the place. It's obvious, okay? Let me tell you something. You buy yourself an Oldsmobile and you put 35 people in it, and they're all going to be really uncomfortable, all right? And after about 4 or 5 hours, somebody's going to start killing somebody. That's a simple way of saying we've hit the limits. The human race has Peter principled itself. So, what then? Well, I suppose we could all just think real hard about it and do our best, recycle a few tin cans, right? Call up the write the newspaper a letter, peace now, whatever. We could do these things, we could do our best. But let's face it, none of this, I think, in this room thinks that we can, in fact, through those typical ways, alter this tidal wave that is approaching the beach while we stand there with our eyes wide open going, uh-oh, what am I going to do now? So if you've got a tidal wave headed your way, you're going to have one serious wave break. You're going to have to do something draconian. There is only one lever in the world today that has the ability to shake up the human race, alter worldview globally, overnight, thus forcing us to reassemble our religions, our politics, our social viewpoints, and our overall structures so that we might prevent what is almost certainly going to happen if we remain passive. And that is the extraterrestrial disclosure. I've often said that there is one other lever that might do it, and that would be the full empowerment of women worldwide in such a way that they were at least equal in terms of management of all human institutions, business, religion, government, because their worldview would temper the worldview of men, which has pretty much exhausted its ability to run human affairs. It has reached its limit. It can't do it anymore. The tragedy here, or not the tragedy, but the fact here is that while I believe this will someday happen, unfortunately, it can't happen soon enough. We just ran out of time. You see what I'm saying? Just like the scientists at Los Alamos ran out of time as they tried to come up with the right words that would convince the government to take a different approach to the use of the 2 atomic bombs that were created at Los Alamos. They just didn't have enough time, and neither do we. So given the fact there's not enough time for women to achieve equality of control and management, they have only one other lever, and that is disclosure. Right? And not simply disclosure, but the proper use of it, meaning you disclose and then you take that paradigm change and you use it in the best possible way, which means you have to have as many structures, religious, political, and otherwise, prepared to act. Not just sitting around there watching television and then the government calls you up one day and says, oh yeah, there's ETs here, and you're going, oh, that's interesting. No, we got to be ready to deal with that. That's why this whole process is underway. So essentially, another way of looking at this is that everybody that is aware of this issue, that comes to these conferences, reads a book, goes to the internet, and decides to act, is collectively part of a group which has a simple task before it: the saving of the human race. I'm serious. This is not some, Austin Powers movie. This is the real deal, right? If we do not act and we achieve the 9 billion people that the current projections allow for, and if the weapons at our disposal are not finally dismantled and a whole bunch of other things don't happen, then the human suffering in this century will transcend anything you can possibly imagine. It will make the suffering in World War II look like a garden party. In other words, more people will die by the mid of this century in a few weeks than died of all of World War II. They won't be able to bury them fast enough. Right? And whether it's the ozone dissolving of the ozone, which would cause unbelievable consequences, the rising of the seas, the unleash of nuclear warheads in the Middle East, causing the true collapse of civilizations, and 1,000 other possibilities we're facing, right? It's going to be a real bad time. That's literally what's at stake. And while I'd like to think we could elect a few wise people to the U.S. Congress and maybe a president with a certain worldview and all would work out, I don't believe it for a second. This is a big problem, and barring divine intervention or extraterrestrial intervention of some draconian fashion, if this is going to have to be done by us, then we only have one lever available to us. We end the truth embargo, disclose the presence of extraterrestrials wherever they come from to the entire world, let it digest that, and reassemble this planet and the way we view the world and see where we are. There's a chance that in that process we will end up getting through this century and have a pretty good time. That's the why disclosure is necessary. Okay, take it away there, big guy.
I hate going after you. I think I'm not a bad writer, but I don't know if I'm as good an extemporaneous speaker as Steve. In fact, I know I'm not. So, although I don't think that I'll have as coherent and eloquent a reply, I'm going to do my best. Part of it is difficult for me because, to be perfectly candid, I agree with basically every single thing Steve has said. I support and believe in the necessity of disclosure about the reality of UFO and ET alien phenomena. My question is that even though it must happen, will it therefore happen for that reason? Okay? It must happen, but that doesn't mean that it will happen before the stuff hits the fan and we all get dirty real bad. Now, I absolutely believe we are walking a tightrope as a civilization, and we are approaching a variety of structural crises that can put us right off that tightrope. And if we fall, I don't think we're getting back up. But let's talk about disclosure. All right, what is the mechanism that disclosure would happen? Who's going to do it? Are we talking about the President of the United States? Well, if that's the case, inside good, pretty good, let's say inside information is telling us that presidents have been out of the loop for at least 30 years, possibly since the late 1960s. Bill Clinton tried, as far as I can tell, to get information on this, and he failed to get sufficient information on this. Is the current president better apprised or not? I don't know. I don't know. Is your congressman going to be able to do this? It doesn't look like it. So, and the reason is that because we have had a silent revolution in this society since the Second World War. And actually, you know, you could even go back and say it started with the Civil War. It increased during the First World War. Every major war increases federal power and takes power away from individuals. Certainly, though, the Second World War was the defining element of our civilization to this day. When Americans think of what their country is, they think, well, we won the Second World War because that's what really created, even beyond the fall of the Soviet Union, World War II, I would argue, I think most would agree, is what has created this world. And it has certainly created the current form of American government, which I have characterized as a national security state. It didn't spring up immediately like Athena out of the head of Zeus, perfectly formed overnight. But it evolved in a period of a couple of decades into an expansive group that is not really answerable in practice to ordinary people like us. And so that is my problem with seeing how disclosure will take place. I will never, ever stop, as long as I have breath in my body, to fight for the rightness of disclosure. The other problem that I do see is that there is indeed a potential for real instability. And that instability may not be worse than the instability that will result if we don't have disclosure and we just keep going along our stupid path toward destruction. But it can be bad anyway. And I don't yet see the motivation of those guys who probably have the technology and the goods and the fabulous, obscene amounts of wealth. I don't really see them that they're really caring to pull our ass out of the fire when everything goes down. Pardon my language. I don't see that motivation on their part. I don't think they've cared about us in the past. I don't think they're going to care about us in 10 or 20 years when things really go bad. So for that reason, where I absolutely will agree with Steve, and I know he agrees with this, is that it is necessary for citizens to take the initiative and in any possible way to increase education on this topic. And that doesn't just mean passively read books. It means, for instance, using technology and developing technology. I have a friend in New York City who's developing ways of using cameras and various types of electronic means to detect things going on. There's camcorders. There's all kinds of things that people can do. There's political activism, which is important. And just because I think the wheels have fallen off the machine of our congressional and electoral system doesn't mean that we can't keep trying to some extent. You never know, because you don't succeed if you don't try. There may yet be ways, even through the traditional system, to break it. I'm just skeptical that it will happen in the near future, and I don't see motivations coming from those in power in Washington.
The only hurry here is that the restaurant's closed and they lock it at 8:30. They've held it open for us. You guys go to dinner now. Sit down. They're going to lock the doors. Really, you can. These people made me look great. I'm sure they've been great to you. I will remind you what I said in the opening ceremonies. None of these people asked me how much they were getting paid when they came, and they are not getting paid unless I have enormous profit after cost. buy some books, go to their websites, keep in touch with them, pray for them, whatever it takes to be a blessing to them. The people on camera have made me look good. The people off camera have also this entire week. Free Amy Boyd, get up here for the video. Get your butts up here. You can't, you're running the camera. Michelle, if Cody and Susie were here, Michelle Ramel. No, you can be on camera. Okay, pan the camera. These are the guys that made this happen. These are the ones that have been taking your phone calls for 2 months, going online, registering you for the conference. Michelle, who won't get out of her seat either. There's many more than that, and folks, it's not anything great I did. Like I said in the opening, I had an idea and I followed the directions. I think God gave me the vision, downloaded it to me. I woke up with the whole thing one morning. If He gives you an idea, run with it, okay? It's going to take more than me. It's going to take more than what you see in this room. Get this information out there and then act upon it, whatever it takes. God bless you. Thank you for coming. And the bad news, the speaker or the dinner we're going to, it is closed. Speakers, spouses, and volunteer staff only, please. It's a closed room on that because we're going to talk about you now. Cloudcroft room, where the lunch was. Now, unless you guys just want to go somewhere else and go another couple of hours. Huh?
They've set up to feed us in the restaurant here, right? You're talking about the restaurant in the hotel?
Yes.
We gotta go.
Unless we just want to go somewhere else. No, we're going to order off the menu.
Yeah, right. But
Yeah.
we've stayed around to do this. We can't not do it.
Right. I agree.
Well, and